The vast Wyoming wilderness stretches endlessly under the scorching summer sun. A hawk circles overhead, its keen eyes spotting movement below. 3 men on horseback pursuing a lone rider through dense pine forest.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
The pursued man's horse is laboring, foam flecking from its mouth as it pushes beyond exhaustion. "Parker, there's nowhere to run," shouts the leader of the pursuers, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his weathered leather vest. The fleeing man, Parker, glances back, terror evident in his eyes. His horse stumbles on loose shale, nearly throwing him. The animal recovers, but precious seconds are lost. The gap closes. The leader raises his rifle, taking careful aim. The shot echoes across the valley. Parker's horse collapses, sending him tumbling down a rocky slope. He comes to rest against a fallen tree, clutching his bleeding leg. The 3 riders approach cautiously, their horses snorting and stamping nervously at the smell of blood. The leader dismounts first. Marshal Samuel Reed, his face hard as granite beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His cold blue eyes scan the injured man with detached interest. 2 deputies flank him, Tucker Walsh, a wiry man with quick eyes and a permanently suspicious expression, and Levi Blackwood, whose massive frame and perpetual scowl had intimidated witnesses into silence across 3 territories. "You've led us on quite a chase, Parker," Reed says, his voice eerily calm as he adjusts his badge. The silver star catches the sunlight, momentarily blinding Parker, but it ends here. Parker clutches his bleeding leg, his eyes darting between the 3 men. "I ain't done nothing, Reed. It was Jackson who took the money. I'm just the messenger." Reed exchanges glances with his deputies. Walsh spits tobacco juice onto the ground near Parker's head. "That right? Might be strange how you're the one running with the satchel then." "Search him!" Reed commands. Blackwood dismounts with surprising grace for a man his size. His massive hands roughly pat down Parker, who winces in pain. "Nothing, Marshal. No satchel." Reed's eyes narrow dangerously. "Where is it, Parker?" I told. I don't have it." Parker's voice rises with panic. "Jackson double-crossed me just like you." Reed pulls a thin cigar from his vest pocket, biting off the end and spitting it away. He strikes a match against his boot heel, the flame dancing in his cold eyes as he lights the cigar. Drawing deeply, he blows smoke directly into Parker's face. "Walsh," Reed says without looking away from Parker. "Track back along his trail. Find where he stashed it." Walsh tips his hat. "Yes, sir." He mounts his horse and disappears back into the tree line. "You won't find anything," Parker insists. Blood continues seeping through his fingers as he clutches his wounded leg. Reed ignores him, puffing quietly on his cigar as Blackwood secures Parker's wrists with rope. The 2 men say nothing, creating a silence that stretches Parker's nerves to the breaking point. "I'm telling you the truth," Parker finally shouts. "Jackson has the money. He took off toward Clearwater County." Reed removes his cigar, examining the glowing tip. "Interesting theory, Parker, but here's what I think happened. I think you and Jackson planned to split the take, but you got greedy. Figured why settle for half when you could have it all?" "No, that's not..." Reed presses the burning cigar into Parker's wounded thigh. The man's screams echo through the forest, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. When the screaming subsides to whimpering, Reed continues as if there had been no interruption. "So you killed Jackson, took the money, and figured you'd disappear. What you didn't count on was me." "I didn't kill anybody," Parker gasps, sweat pouring down his face. "Jackson's still alive. Head north to Clearwater. You'll find him at his brother's place." Walsh returns, his expression grim. "Nothing along the trail, Marshal. But I found this." He holds up a torn piece of paper, a partial map with coordinates, scribbled in the margin. Reed takes the paper, studying it briefly, before tucking it into his vest pocket. Looks like our friend here is more clever than we gave him credit for. He kneels beside Parker, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Last chance. Where's the money? Parker's face contorts with fear and pain. I swear on my mother's grave, Reed. I don't have it. Reed sighs, standing and brushing dirt from his knees. I believe you, Parker. Relief washes over Parker's face. I believe you don't have it anymore. You stashed it somewhere along your trail. Hope drains from Parker's eyes. Blackwood, Reed says, still looking at Parker. Make him talk. Blackwood's massive hands go to work with methodical brutality. Parker's screams once again pierce the wilderness. After several minutes, Reed raises his hand and Blackwood steps back. 7 miles back, Parker gasps between sobs. There's an old lightning-struck oak. Money's buried on the north side. Reed nods to Walsh, who immediately mounts his horse and rides off. Reed lights another cigar as they wait. The only sounds are Parker's labored breathing and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. An hour passes before Walsh returns, a canvas, satchel tied to his saddle. Reed opens it, revealing stacks of bills and gold coins. He counts methodically, his expression darkening. It's light, he says finally. Where's the rest? Parker looks genuinely confused. That's all of it, I swear. Reed stares at him for a long moment, then nods to Blackwood, who pulls his revolver. Parker's eyes widened. Wait! I can explain. The gunshot echoes across the valley. Birds take flight from nearby trees. Reed calmly takes the satchel from Walsh and secures it to his own saddle. Let's head back, he says. Got a telegram saying Jackson was spotted near Cottonwood Ranch. We'll cut through the high pass and be there by nightfall. Walsh frowns. Thought you said he was dead. Reed mounts his horse. I'd never believed Parker's story about Jackson being alive. But someone has the rest of our money, and I aim to find out who. As they ride away, leaving Parker's body for the scavengers, none of them notice the distant figure watching from the ridge through a brass spyglass. The observer slowly lowers the glass, turns his horse, and disappears silently into the forest. 200 miles away, in the rolling grasslands of Clearwater County, a very different scene unfolds. The Cottonwood Ranch stands as an oasis of civilization amid the untamed wilderness. White-painted fences enclose grazing horses. A 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch offers shade from the relentless sun. On that porch sits Malcolm Carter, his unseeing eyes hidden behind dark glasses. At 53 years old, his face is a roadmap of hard years, etched with lines that speak of both laughter and grief. His hands, calloused and strong, work methodically, cleaning a rifle he cannot see. His fingers move with practiced precision, each component becoming whole again through touch alone. Pa, a young woman's voice calls from inside the house. You out there? Right here, Sarah, Malcolm responds, his hands never pausing in their work. Sarah Carter steps onto the porch, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. At 22, she carries herself with the confidence of someone who has shouldered responsibility from a young age. Her amber eyes, so like her mother's, take in the disassembled rifle with a mixture of resignation and concern. Thought. You promised to leave that locked up, she says, sitting beside him. Malcolm's weathered face breaks into a smile. Can't a man clean his property without getting lectured? Cleaning's one thing, but we both know you were out shooting again yesterday. She touches his arm. Uncle Ethan told me. Malcolm's smile fades. Ethan should mind his own business. He worries about you. We both do. Malcolm reassembles the rifle with fluid movements, each piece finding its place without hesitation or error. Been blind for 12 years, Sarah. Doesn't mean I'm helpless. Nobody said helplessly. Her voice softens. But you don't have to. Prove anything, especially not with a gun. Malcolm sets the completed rifle aside, his unseeing eyes seeming to stare into the distance. It's not about proving anything. It's about remembering who I am.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Sarah takes his weathered hand in hers. "You're Malcolm Carter, my father, the best rancher in the county." He squeezes her hand gently. "I'm more than that, Sarah, or at least I was." The conversation is interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. Malcolm's head turns slightly, his ears picking up the rhythm of the horse's gait. Ethan's back earlier than expected. Sarah looks surprised. "How do you always do that?" A wry smile crosses Malcolm's face. When one door closes, another opens. Eyes may fail, but ears sharpen. Ethan Brooks, Malcolm's brother-in-law, rides into view. His horse is lathered with sweat, suggesting he pushed the animal hard. Something in his rigid posture puts Malcolm on alert. "Something's wrong," Malcolm murmurs, rising to his feet. Sarah watches her uncle dismount with uncharacteristic urgency. "You're right." He looks worried. Ethan takes the porch steps 2 at a time. At 48, he carries himself with the straight-back discipline of his military days. The former cavalry officer had settled nearby after Malcolm's accident, helping his widowed sister run the ranch until her death 5 years ago. Since then, he's remained, supporting his niece and blind brother-in-law despite their occasional clashes. "Malcolm," Ethan says, slightly out of breath, "we need to talk." Malcolm gestures toward the door. "Sarah, would you mind giving us a moment?" Sarah's eyes darted between the two men. "If this concerns the ranch, I should hear it too." "It's not." "About the ranch," Ethan says quickly. "Just some news from town." Malcolm nods toward the house. "Go finish your baking, Sarah. I'll fill you in if it's important." Reluctantly, Sarah returns inside, closing the door behind her. Malcolm gestures to the empty chair beside him. "Must be serious if you rode Daisy that hard," Malcolm observes. "She sounds like she's about to collapse." Ethan sits heavily. "Someone was asking about you in town." Malcolm remains perfectly still. "Lots of folks know me. Not like this." Ethan lowers his voice. 3 men wearing marshals' badges. But Fisher says he's never seen legitimate marshals behave the way these men did. Malcolm's fingers tap quietly against the arm of his chair. "What were they asking? If anyone matching your description lived in the area? Specifically mentioned your condition?" Malcolm is silent for a long moment. "They give names?" Leader called himself Marshal Reed. Had 2 deputies with him, big fella named Blackwood and a tracker named Walsh. Malcolm's unseeing eyes stare. Straight ahead, his expression unreadable. "Never heard of them." Ethan leans closer. "Malcolm, I know when you're lying. These men worry me. Fisher said they didn't act like lawmen, more like wolves hunting." Malcolm turns toward his brother-in-law. "Did they mention why they're looking for me?" "No. But they're asking about someone named Jackson, too." A muscle tightens in Malcolm's jaw. "Jackson?" Ethan watches him carefully. "Does that name mean something to you?" Before Malcolm can answer, the door opens, and Sarah steps back onto the porch. Her expression suggests she heard everything. "Who are these men, Pa?" she asks directly. Malcolm sighs. "Sarah, don't Sarah me," she interrupts. "I deserve to know if there's trouble coming." Malcolm removes his dark glasses, revealing milky, unseeing eyes. "There's nothing to worry about, probably just some misunderstanding." Sarah crosses her arms. "Then why is Uncle Ethan looking like he's seen a ghost?" Ethan clears his throat. "Your father's right. Could be nothing, but until we know for sure, I think we should be cautious." "What kind of cautiousness?" Sarah presses. Malcolm replaces his glasses. "For starters, you'll stay with Ethan for a few days." "Absolutely not," Sarah says firmly. "I'm not leaving you alone." "Sarah, no, Pa." Her voice is steel. "I lost Ma. I'm not losing you too. Whatever's coming, we face it together." Malcolm's expression softens. "You're as stubborn as your mother." "Learned from the best," she replies. Ethan rises from his chair. "At least let me stay here too. Extra eyes can't hurt." Malcolm nods slowly. All right, but first, ride back to your place and get your Winchester, and stop by the Jenkins farm. Tell Robert I need to speak with him urgently. Robert Jenkins? Ethan asks, surprised. The blacksmith's boy? He's not a boy anymore, Malcolm says, and he's the fastest rider in the county. If things go south, I want Sarah to have a way out. Sarah starts to protest, but Malcolm raises his hand. It's just precaution, Sarah. Sometimes the best way to avoid a fight is to prepare for one. As Ethan departs on his tired horse, Sarah sits beside her father. You know these men, don't you? It's not a question. Malcolm's weathered hands find the rifle again, fingers tracing the familiar contours. It was a long time ago, another life. Before you were blind, before your mother, before you. His voice drops to barely a whisper. Before I became Malcolm Carter. The setting sun casts long shadows across the porch. In the distance, a wolf howls, the sound echoing across the valley. Malcolm's head turns toward it, listening. More coming, he says quietly. Packs gathering. Sarah shivers despite the warm evening. You're not talking about wolves anymore, are you? Malcolm's hand finds hers, squeezing gently. Whatever happens, Sarah, remember this. The man I was with died a long time ago. The man I am now, your father. He's the only one that matters. As darkness falls over Cottonwood Ranch, Malcolm sits motionless, his unseeing eyes turned toward the horizon as if watching for approaching storms. The rifle rests across his lap, a remnant of a past he thought buried. But some ghosts refuse to stay buried, and Malcolm Carter knows better than most that a man's past has a way of finding him, no matter how far he runs or how much he changes. The wolves are coming, and Malcolm Carter is ready. Night falls over Cottonwood Ranch, a blanket of stars illuminating the prairie. Malcolm sits on the porch, listening to the symphony of night sounds. Crickets chirping, the distant howl of coyotes, the soft creak of the windmill turning in the gentle breeze. His rifle remains across his lap, a connection to the man he once was. Inside the house, Sarah moves between windows, pulling curtains closed. Her movements are purposeful, but tinged with anxiety. Through a gap in the kitchen curtains, she watches. Her father's silhouette on the porch, a solitary sentinel against the coming storm. The sound of approaching horses breaks the night's tranquility. Malcolm tilts his head, and counting 1, 2 riders. The familiar gait of Ethan's horse is accompanied by a second, lighter step. Robert Jenkins has arrived. They're here, Pa, Sarah calls from the doorway. Malcolm nods, rising from his chair with the rifle held casually at his side. Bring them in, we've got plans. Robert Jenkins strides onto the porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the night sky. At 26, the blacksmith's son has grown into a man of quiet strength. His hands, calloused from years at the forge, remove his hat as he approaches Malcolm. Mr. Carter, he says, his deep voice respectful. Ethan says you need me. Malcolm extends his hand, which Robert takes firmly. Appreciate you coming, Robert. Sarah, fix our guests some coffee. This might be a long night. Inside, lamps cast warm light across the modest farmhouse living room. Family portraits hang on the walls, glimpses of happier times. The largest shows Malcolm, still sighted, standing beside a beautiful woman with Sarah's amber eyes. Eliza, Carter's gentle smile, seems to watch over the room's occupants as they gather around the oak table. These men, Malcolm begins without preamble, are dangerous, more dangerous than ordinary bandits. Ethan places his Winchester rifle on the table. Fisher said they were asking all over town, seemed particularly interested in the blind rancher who lives with his daughter. Robert's brow furrows. What do they want with you, Mr. Carter? Malcolm removes his dark glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It's complicated, son. Pa, Sarah interjects, setting coffee mugs before each man. We need the truth. All of it. The room falls silent. Malcolm's unseeing eyes seem to search the darkness that has been his world for 12 years. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of buried secrets. Before I came to Clearwater County, before I married your mother, I was someone else, someone who made enemies. Who? Sarah asks softly. Malcolm's weathered hands wrap around his coffee mug, drawing warmth from it. It doesn't matter who I was. What matters is these men believe I have something that belongs to them. Do you? Ethan asks bluntly. A ghost of a smile crosses Malcolm's face. No, but they won't believe that. Why not just explain the situation to them? Robert suggests. If you don't have what they're looking for, men like Reed don't listen to explanations, Malcolm interrupts, his voice hardening. They only understand force. Sarah exchanges a worried glance with her uncle. You know this Reed person? Malcolm shakes his head. Never met him, but I know his kind. His fingers drum thoughtfully against the table. They'll come at first light, 3 of them, possibly more if they've recruited local help. Ethan leans forward. How can you be so sure? Because that's what I would do. Malcolm's words hang, in the air laden with implication. They'll want the advantage of daylight against unfamiliar territory. Robert sets his mug down decisively. Then we need to get you and Sarah out before dawn. My father's wagon— No, Malcolm interrupts. Running confirms guilt in their eyes. They'd never stop hunting. Then what's your plan? Ethan demands. Malcolm's expression remains impassive. We prepare. And when they come, we show them they've chosen the wrong target. Sarah's hand covers her father's. Pa, you're blind. These are armed men looking for trouble. Malcolm turns toward her voice, his milky eyes seeming to find her despite his blindness. Sarah, your mother never told you much about how we met, did she? Sarah looks surprised by the question. She said you saved her from bandits on the trail. To Denver. That's true, Malcolm acknowledges. But she never told you why I was on that trail, or why those bandits fled at the mere mention of my name. Before Sarah can respond, a sound from outside catches Malcolm's attention. His head turns sharply toward the window, body tensing like a predator sensing danger. Someone's watching the house, he says quietly. Ethan reaches for his rifle. Where? North. Side, near the big cottonwood. Malcolm rises smoothly from his chair. Don't light any more lamps. They're trying to count how many people are inside. Robert moves to the window, carefully peering through a gap in the curtains. I don't see anyone. Trust me, Malcolm says, his voice certain. He's there. Crouched in the shadows of the massive cottonwood tree, Tucker Walsh observes the Carter farmhouse through a brass spyglass. His keen tracker's eyes count shadows moving behind curtained windows. His lips move silently as he tallies the occupants. Lowering the spyglass, Walsh slips back through the darkness toward where Reed and Blackwood wait with the horses, hidden in a grove of trees 1/2 mile from the ranch. 4 of them, Walsh reports. Carter, his daughter, and 2 other men. One of them rode in just a couple hours ago. Reed nods, digesting this information. In the moonlight, his face is a mask of cold calculation. Armed, saw at least 2 rifles, Walsh confirms. The house is buttoned up tight. They know something's coming. Blackwood spits tobacco juice into the dirt. It doesn't matter if they're expecting us. Carter's blind as a bat. The other 3 don't worry me. Reed continues sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the soft scraping sound ominous in the night air. Never underestimate a cornered animal, Blackwood, especially one that's survived this long. You sure it's him? Walsh asks, settling against a tree trunk. Been a long time since anyone's seen. It's him, Reed interrupts. 12 years ago, he disappeared after the Prescott job. At the same time, a rancher named Malcolm Carter suddenly appears in Clearwater County with a young daughter. He tests his knife's edge against his thumb. Too many coincidences. Still don't explain why he'd take just a portion of the money and leave the rest. Blackwood points out. Reed slides the knife into its sheath. Maybe he didn't take it for the money. Maybe he took it because of what else was in that satchel. Walsh and Blackwood exchange confused glances. What else was in it? Walsh finally asks. Reed's eyes gleam in the moonlight. Insurance, the kind that keeps men like us out of prison. He rises, dusting off his pants. Get some rest. We move at first light. As his deputies settle in for the night, Reed stares toward the distant farmhouse, his expression unreadable. This hunt is personal, more than his companions realize. Tomorrow will end a chapter that began 12 years ago in blood and betrayal. Inside the farmhouse, Malcolm has assembled his small force. Around the kitchen table, a hand-drawn map of the ranch property lies before them, created years ago when Malcolm could still see. Robert, Malcolm says, I need you to take my best horse and ride for the marshal's office in Harrisville at first light. The real marshal, he clarifies. Name's Callahan. Tell him Samuel Reed and his deputies are impersonating federal marshals in his jurisdiction. Robert nods. That's a 4-hour ride each way, Mr. Carter. You'll be on your own most of the day. We'll manage, Malcolm assures him. Ethan, I need you to secure the barn and outbuildings. Any tools or implements that could serve as weapons, bring them to the house. What about me? Sarah asks. Malcolm's expression softens. You'll handle. Loading and preparation. Every gun we have needs to be ready and accessible. And you? Ethan inquires. Malcolm stands, moving to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room. His fingers find the key hanging from a chain around his neck. I need to reacquaint myself with old friends, he says cryptically. The chest opens with a creak. Of aged hinges. Malcolm reaches inside, his hands finding their target unerringly. He withdraws a wooden box, lovingly crafted and maintained despite his blindness. The room falls silent as he places it on the table. Sarah gasps softly as Malcolm opens the box, revealing a pair of custom Colt revolvers, their silver inlay catching the lamplight. Beside them lies a leather gun belt, the holsters worn from years of use but meticulously maintained. Pa, Sarah whispers, I've never seen these before. Your mother made me promise to lock them away, Malcolm explains, his fingers tracing the contours of the weapons. Said they belonged to a dead man. Ethan stares at the guns, recognition dawning in his eyes. Those are... Yes, Malcolm interrupts. They are. Understanding passes between the two men, leaving Sarah and Robert confused but sensing the significance of the moment. Malcolm lifts one of the revolvers, his hands remembering their old companion. With practiced motions that defy his blindness, he checks the cylinder, spinning it with a flick of his wrist before returning it to the box. Get some rest, he tells them. Dawn comes early, and with it unwelcome visitors. As the others prepare for sleep, Malcolm returns to the porch alone. The night air carries the scent of approaching rain. He tilts his face toward the heavens, feeling the light touch of a breeze against his skin. Eliza, he whispers to the memory of his wife, I promised you I'd left that life behind, that I'd never be that man again. His fingers brush against the revolvers now holstered at his sides. Forgive me for breaking that promise. In the darkness, Malcolm begins a ritual from his past. His hands move with fluid grace, drawing and holstering the revolvers with increasing speed. Each repetition flows more smoothly than the last. Muscle, memory awakening after years of dormancy. A blind man with guns seems like folly, but as Malcolm's movements accelerate to a blur of deadly precision, it becomes clear that these weapons are extensions of himself, requiring no sight to wield with lethal accuracy. The first hints of dawn creep across the eastern horizon as Robert Jenkins saddles Malcolm's fastest horse. Sarah stands nearby, holding a packet of food for his journey. 4 hours to Harrisville, Robert confirms, securing his saddlebags. I'll ride like the devil himself is chasing me. Sarah hands him the food packet. Be careful, Robert. These men... She hesitates. I know, he assures her, his hand briefly covering hers. "I'll bring help, Sarah. You have my word." Their eyes meet, a current of unspoken feelings passing between them. Then Robert mounts, tips his hat, and spurs the horse into a gallop. Sarah watches until horse and rider disappear into the morning mist. Inside the house, Malcolm sits at the kitchen table, his sensitive fingers reading a letter by touch, raised pinpricks in the paper, forming words only he can read. Ethan enters from checking the perimeter. "Robert's away," Ethan reports. "No sign of Reed or his men yet." Malcolm carefully folds the letter, returning it to an inner pocket. "They're coming, just biding their time." Ethan sits across from his brother-in-law. "Malcolm, there's something I need to ask, and I need the truth." Malcolm tilts his head. "Waiting. These guns," Ethan continues, gesturing to the revolvers at Malcolm's sides. "The letter you just read, the way you move sometimes, like your blindness, is an afterthought." He leans forward. "Who were you before Malcolm Carter?" A sad smile crosses Malcolm's weathered face. "You already know the answer, Ethan. You recognize the guns." Ethan's voice drops to barely a whisper. "The ghost of Laramie Basin." Malcolm neither confirms nor denies, his expression unchanging. "They said he could shoot a man between the eyes at 100 paces, Ethan continues, "that he killed 30 men before vanishing 12 years ago." "Legends grow with each telling," Malcolm says dismissively, "but the ghost was a hired gun." Ethan pressed. "A killer, not the brother-in-law I've known for 15 years. Malcolm's unseeing eyes seem to look through Ethan. "Men change, Ethan. Find something worth living for instead of dying for." His hand unconsciously touches the letter in his pocket. "Your sister gave me that chance." Before Ethan can respond, Sarah bursts into the kitchen. "Riders coming. 3 of them, moving slow along the main road." Malcolm rises, his posture straightening as he adjusts his gun belt. The transformation is subtle but profound. The blind rancher receding, something deadlier taking his place. "So it begins," he says quietly. "Sarah, take position upstairs with the rifle. Ethan, the front porch. Remember, they'll try to separate us." As they move to their positions, Sarah catches her father's arm. "Pa, how will you, Malcolm's hand covers hers reassuringly. "Trust me, Sarah, I may not be able to see, but I haven't forgotten how to fight." She nods, blinking back tears before hurrying upstairs. Malcolm steps onto the porch, the morning sun warming his face. He removes his dark glasses, revealing his milky eyes to the world. No more hiding, no more pretending. In the distance, 3 riders approach at a measured pace. Malcolm's acute hearing picks up the creak of leather, the jingle of spurs, the soft snort of horses. His hands rest casually near his revolvers as he waits for the confrontation 12 years in the making. The ghost of Laramie Basin has returned from the dead, and death rides toward him across the morning-lit prairie. The 3 riders approach Cottonwood Ranch at an unhurried pace, morning sunlight glinting off the badges pinned to their vests. Marshal Samuel Reed leads, his posture rigid and authoritative. Flanking him are Walsh and Blackwood, their eyes constantly scanning the property for signs of resistance. From her upstairs window, Sarah watches through the scope of her father's hunting rifle. Her finger rests lightly on the trigger guard, not yet ready to fire, but prepared for the possibility. The strangers look like lawmen, clean-shaven, well-dressed, their badges catching the sunlight, but something about their eyes, cold and predatory, confirms her father's warnings. On the front porch, Malcolm stands unnaturally still, his unseeing eyes exposed to the world. Without his dark glasses, his blindness is unmistakable. He appears vulnerable, defenseless, a perfect target. Yet there's a quiet confidence in his stance that belies his disability. Ethan watches from the shadows of the doorway. Winchester, ready. 3 riders, he confirms softly to Malcolm. Reed in front, badge displayed prominently. The other 2 are hanging back slightly. Malcolm nods almost imperceptibly. Remember, Let them talk first. We need to understand what they think. They know. The riders stop 20 yards from the house. Reed raises his hand, signaling his deputies to remain in place as he nudges his horse forward alone. His cold blue eyes assess the blind man on the porch, noting the gun belt that seems incongruous on a sightless rancher. "Malcolm Carter," Reed calls out, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a lawman. Malcolm inclines his head slightly. "I am. What brings a U.S. Marshal to my door so early, Mr. Reed?" Marshal Samuel Reed. He produces a folded document from his vest pocket. "I have a warrant concerning stolen property believed to be in your possession." Malcolm's expression remains neutral. "Interesting accusation for a man you've never met. What property would that be?" Reed dismounts smoothly, leading his horse closer. "Mind if I approach? These old eyes can't shout across a yard all day." A thin smile crosses Malcolm's face. "By all means, Marshal. Just you, though. Your deputies can wait where they are." Reed hands his reins to Walsh and strides forward with measured steps. He climbs the porch stairs, boots heavy on the wooden planks, and extends the document toward Malcolm. "Your warrant," Reed says, the paper held between them. Malcolm doesn't move to take it. "I'm afraid you'll have to read it to me, Marshal. Being blind has its inconveniences." Reed's eyes narrow slightly, but he returns the paper to his pocket. "We're looking for approximately $50,000 in cash and gold, stolen during a bank robbery in Prescott, Arizona, 12 years ago." Malcolm's head tilts slightly. 12 years is a long time to chase stolen money, Marshal. "It's not just about the money," Reed replies, his voice hardening. "The man who took it killed 2 of my deputies in the process." "And you think that man is me?" Malcolm asks, a hint of amusement in his tone. "A blind rancher?" Reed steps closer, his voice dropping to ensure only Malcolm can hear. "I think you weren't always blind. Ghost." The name hangs in the air between them. Malcolm's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in his posture, a subtle readiness that would be invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. "I don't know what you're talking about," Malcolm says evenly. Reed smiles coldly. "I think you do. 12 years ago, the legendary ghost of Laramie Basin disappeared after the Prescott job. At the same time, a blind rancher named Malcolm Carter appeared in Clearwater County." He leans closer. "Quite a coincidence." Malcolm's unseeing eyes seem to look through Reed. "Life is full of coincidences, Marshal." "And lies," Reed counters. "Like that blindness of yours. A convenient way to disappear, isn't it? Who'd suspect a blind man of being the most feared gunslinger west of the Mississippi?" Malcolm's voice remains calm. "I lost my sight in an accident, Marshal. The doctor in Harrisville can confirm it." "Maybe so," Reed concedes. "But that doesn't change who you were or what you took." His hand moves casually toward his gun. "Now we can do this civilly. You tell me where the money is, and more importantly, the ledger that was with it. And maybe your daughter doesn't have to see her father die today." At the mention of Sarah, Malcolm's expression hardens. "You've made 2 mistakes, Marshal. First, assuming I'm this ghost you're looking for." His hand moves with surprising speed, catching Reed's wrist as it reaches for his gun. "And second, threatening my daughter." Reed's eyes widened in shock at the blind man's reflexes. Malcolm's grip is like iron, holding Reed's hand frozen inches from his weapon. "That's quite a grip for a simple rancher," Reed says through clenched teeth. Malcolm releases him and steps back. "Years of working the land builds strength." Reed rubs his wrist, reassessing the man before him. "One last chance, Carter. Give me what I came for, or this gets ugly." Malcolm's head tilts slightly, as if listening to something beyond Reed's words. "Your deputies are getting restless, Marshal. The big one, Blackwood is it, has his hand on his gun. The tracker is circling toward the back of the house." His blind eyes stare directly at Reed. "Did you tell them to do that, or are they just impatient?" Reed's composure falters momentarily. "How did you—" I've spent 12 years relying on my ears instead of my eyes, Malcolm interrupts. You'd be amazed what you can hear when you really listen. He takes a step toward Reed. Now, I think it's time for you to leave my property. Reed's face darkens. We're not going anywhere without what we came for. Then there's nothing more to discuss. Malcolm turns as if to enter the house. Sarah, he calls out, our guests are leaving. See them off, would you? The barrel of Sarah's rifle appears at the upstairs window, aimed directly at Reed. At the same moment, Ethan steps onto the porch, Winchester leveled at the deputies. Reed's cold smile returns. So that's how it's going to be. He backs down. The steps, eyes never leaving Malcolm. I was hoping we could settle this without bloodshed, but I'm just as happy to do it the hard way. As Reed returns to his horse, Malcolm calls after him. Marshal, a word of advice. Whatever you think I took from you, whatever you believe I am, let it go. Some ghosts are better left in the past. Reed mounts his horse, face tight with controlled rage. This isn't over, Carter. No, Malcolm agrees quietly. I don't suppose it is. The three riders retreat down the road, dust rising behind them as they disappear around a bend. Only when they're out of sight does Malcolm allow himself to exhale slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Ethan lowers his rifle. They'll be back. With more men, Malcolm confirms, replacing his dark glasses. Before nightfall. Sarah appears in the doorway, her young face etched with worry. What did he mean about a ledger, Pa? Malcolm turns toward her voice. Nothing. That concerns us, Sarah. But it does concern us, she insists. They're threatening our home, our lives. Her voice breaks slightly. He called you ghost. What did he mean? Malcolm sighs deeply, running a weathered hand through his grey-streaked hair. It's a long story, Sarah. One I'd hoped you'd never have to hear. Ethan places a supportive hand on Malcolm's shoulder. She deserves to know, Malcolm, especially now. Malcolm nods reluctantly. You're right. He extends his hand toward his daughter. Come. There's something I need to show you. Reed and his deputies ride in silence until they reach a secluded clearing beyond sight of the ranch. There, Reed dismounts and paces furiously, his carefully controlled facade cracking with rage. He's playing us, he snarls. That blindness is an act. Walsh dismounts more carefully, eyeing his leader with caution. I don't know, Marshal. Those eyes looked genuinely damaged to me. Then how the hell did he know where we were? What were we doing? Reed demands. Blackwood spits tobacco juice onto the ground. Maybe the girl or her uncle was signaling him somehow. Reed shakes his head. No, he knew things they couldn't have seen from their positions. He stops pacing suddenly. It doesn't matter. Blind or not, he's the ghost, and he has what belongs to me. What's our play? Walsh asks, settling against a tree trunk. Reed's eyes glint with malice. We go back after dark. With reinforcements. Blackwood frowns. What reinforcements? We're 3 days' ride from anyone we trust. A cruel smile spreads across Reed's face. We don't need people we trust. We just need people who'll do anything for money. He turns to Walsh. Ride to Thompson's Crossing. There's a saloon called the Broken Spoke. Ask for a man named Hawkins. Tell him there's $500 waiting if he brings some friends. To help with a property dispute. Walsh nods, understanding. Hawkins and his crew aren't exactly selective about their jobs. Exactly, Reed agrees. They're hired guns who don't ask questions. He checks his pocket watch. If you ride now, you can be back with them by sundown. As Walsh mounts up, Reed calls after him. Make sure Hawkins understands. I want Carter alive. He's no use to us dead. Walsh spurs his horse into motion, disappearing down the trail toward Thompson's Crossing. Once he's gone, Blackwood turns to Reed with a questioning look. You never said what was in that ledger that's so important, he says cautiously. Reed's expression darkens. Insurance, Blackwood. Names, dates, payments, evidence that would see certain powerful people hanged. He draws his knife, testing its edge with his thumb, including us. In the root cellar beneath the Cottonwood Ranch house, Malcolm lights an oil lamp. The flame illuminates a small space lined with preserved foods and supplies. He feels along the earthen wall until his fingers find a loose brick. Removing it reveals a small cavity. Sarah watches as her father withdraws a thin metal box, its surface etched with intricate patterns. The box is sealed with a small padlock. "I haven't opened this since before you were born," Malcolm says quietly, producing a key from around his neck, the same chain that held the key to his gun-belt chest. The lock opens with a soft click. Inside the box lies a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, and beneath it a leather-bound journal. Malcolm hands the newspaper to Sarah. "Read it to me, though I know every word by heart." Sarah unfolds the brittle paper, the headline, leaping out at her. "Ghost of Laramie Basin strikes again. 3 dead in Wyoming stage robbery." Her voice trembles as she reads aloud. "The notorious gunman known only as the Ghost has claimed 3 more victims in a daring daylight robbery of the Cheyenne to Laramie stage. Witnesses describe a tall figure dressed in black who appeared like a phantom from the roadside brush. The Ghost's signature silver-inlaid revolvers claimed the lives of 2 guards before they could draw their weapons. The 3rd victim, Wells, Fargo Detective James Hargrove, managed to wound the infamous outlaw before succumbing to his injuries. Sarah looks up from the paper, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Pa, this can't be—" "It is," Malcolm interrupts gently. "Before I was Malcolm Carter, before I was your father or Eliza's husband, I was someone else, someone feared." Sarah sinks onto a wooden crate, the newspaper clipping trembling in her hands. "You were a killer." Malcolm's weathered face shows the weight of his past. "I was many things, Sarah. None of them are good." He gestures to the journal. "That tells the whole story, though I never had the courage to read it to you." Ethan picks up the journal, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. "Your mother wrote this," he says to Sarah, recognizing his sister's penmanship. Malcolm nods. "Eliza knew everything, who I was, what I'd done. She helped me become someone different, someone better." Sarah stares at her father, seeing him anew. "The ghost of Laramie Basin," she whispers. "They said he never missed, that he could outdraw any man alive." "Legends grow with each telling," Malcolm says dismissively. "But yes, I had certain skills, which you still have, blind or not," Ethan observes. "I saw how you caught Reed's hand. No ordinary man could move that fast, especially not without sight." Malcolm sighs deeply. "When I lost my vision, I thought that part of my life was over, but your mother insisted I learn to rely on my other senses, said someday I might need to protect you, Sarah." A sad smile crosses his face. "She was always thinking ahead, your mother." Sarah clutches the journal to her chest. "But this Reed, he thinks you stole something from him, money and some kind of ledger." Malcolm's expression hardens. 12 years ago, I was hired for one last job, a bank in Prescott. I was told it would be simple. Get in, take the money from a specific safe deposit box, get out. His hands clench into fists at the memory. What they didn't tell me was that the box contained more than money. It held a ledger documenting years of corruption, bribes paid to judges, sheriffs, even territorial governors. And Reed wants this ledger, Ethan concludes. Malcolm nods. Reed wasn't a marshal then. He was a hired gun, like me, working for the same people who hired me for the job. His unseeing eyes seemed to look into the past. When I saw what was in that box, I knew I couldn't give it to them. Those names, those crimes, it was too much power in the wrong hands. So you took it and ran, Sarah says softly. I tried to, Malcolm corrects. They caught up to me near Laramie, put a bullet in my back that nicked my spine. His hand touches the back of his neck. Bullet fragments migrated over time, pressing on the optic nerve. That's how I lost my sight, slowly, over 6 months. Sarah's eyes fill with tears. And Mother? How did she fit into all this? A genuine smile crosses Malcolm's face at the memory. She found me, half dead, in a ravine outside Laramie. She was traveling to visit Ethan, who was stationed at Fort Laramie then. He reaches out, finding Sarah's hand. She could have left me there. Should have, probably. But your mother always had more compassion than sense. She saved you. Sarah whispers. In more ways than one, Malcolm agrees. Nursed me back to health, helped me create a new identity, and when I started losing my sight, she taught me how to live without it. His voice grows husky with emotion. She gave me a reason to live, Sarah. You both did. Ethan's practical nature reasserts itself. But you didn't actually take this ledger, did you? Otherwise, Reed wouldn't still be looking for it 12 years. Later, Malcolm shakes his head. I hid it before they caught up to me, somewhere they'd never think to look. Where? Sarah asks. Malcolm turns his face toward her voice. Better you don't know, Sarah. Reed is dangerous. If he thought you knew, the implication hangs in the air between them. Sarah squares her shoulders, her mother's determination evident in her posture. So what do we do now, Pa? Reed won't just go away. Malcolm stands, his bearing suddenly different, straighter, more confident. The blind rancher recedes, and something of the ghost emerges in his stance. Now, he says, his voice taking on a hard edge she's never heard before. We prepare for war. In the dying light of afternoon, Tucker Walsh rides into the dusty outpost of Thompson's Crossing. The single street is lined with weathered buildings, a general store, a blacksmith, and at the far end, a ramshackle saloon with a broken wagon, wheel nailed above its door, the broken spoke. Inside, the air is thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Card games occupy several tables, while working girls circulate among the patrons. Walsh's eyes adjust to the dim light as he approaches the bar. Looking for Hawkins, he tells the barkeep, sliding a silver dollar across the scarred wood. The barkeep pockets the coin and nods toward a corner table where 5 men sit playing poker. The largest of them, a bear-like figure with a forked beard and an eye patch, seems to be winning, judging by the pile of cash before him. Walsh approaches cautiously. Hawkins! The bearded man looks up, his single eye evaluating Walsh from head to toe. Depends who's asking. Walsh flashes his deputies. Badge, got a job, pays well, Reed sent me. At the mention of Reed, Hawkins's expression changes. He gestures to an empty chair. Sit. Tell me about this job. As Walsh outlines the situation, Hawkins's companions exchange glances. These are hard men, their faces weathered by sun and violence, their eyes holding the flat, dead look of those who kill without remorse. 500 to help flush out one blind rancher, Hawkins clarifies when Walsh finishes. Seems generous? Walsh leans closer. He's not just any rancher, he's the ghost of Laramie Basin. A ripple of reaction passes through the men. The ghost was a legend. A bogeyman used to frighten young gunslingers. Some claimed he could kill a man before they even cleared leather. Others said he could shoot by sound alone, hitting targets he couldn't even see. Hawkins strokes his beard. Thoughtfully. The ghost is dead. It has been for years. That's what everyone thought, Walsh agrees. Reed says differently. Hawkins studies Walsh's face, searching for deception. Finding none, he drains his whiskey glass and slams it down on the table. 1,000, he counters. 500 now, 500 when it's done. Walsh hesitates. Reed said 500. A total. Hawkins laughs, a sound like gravel shifting. Reed's asking us to go up against the ghost. If he's really alive, 500 ain't nearly enough. He leans forward. But I'll throw in something extra. We won't kill him unless absolutely necessary. Reed wants him alive, right? Walsh nods reluctantly. Reed wants him alive. Then 1,000 it is. Hawkins extends his massive hand. Deal! Walsh shakes, feeling somehow that he's made a pact with something darker than he intended. Deal. We ride at sunset. As Walsh leaves, to send a telegraph to Reed, Hawkins turns to his men with a wolfish grin. Boys, today's our lucky day. The ghost of Laramie Basin, worth 1,000 from Reed, but the bounty on his head? Last I heard it was 20,000 dead or alive. His companions raise their glasses in silent toast. None of them notices. The young man at the bar, who slips out the door behind Walsh, mounting his horse and racing in the direction of Cottonwood Ranch. The afternoon sun hangs low in the western sky as Malcolm, Ethan, and Sarah emerge from the root cellar. The revelation of Malcolm's true identity has created a tangible shift in the atmosphere. Sarah watches her father with new eyes, seeing shadows of the legendary gunman beneath the familiar exterior of the blind rancher who raised her. We have. A few hours before they return, Malcolm says, his voice taking on the crisp, authoritative tone of a man accustomed to command. Ethan, check our ammunition supplies. Sarah, gather food and water. We may need to hold out for a while. As they move to their tasks, the sound of approaching hoofbeats reaches Malcolm's sensitive ears. He turns his head sharply toward the sound, hand instinctively moving to his revolver. Someone's coming, he announces. Single rider, pushing hard. Ethan grabs his rifle, moving to the window. Friend or foe? Malcolm listens intently, his head tilted. Too early for Reed to return with reinforcements. His brow furrows in concentration. Not Robert's horse either. Different gait. Sarah joins Ethan at the window, rifle ready. I see him, young man riding like the devil's on his tail. As the rider draws closer, Malcolm steps onto the porch, Ethan covering him from the doorway. The young man reins his lathered horse to a stop in the yard, raising his hands when he sees the rifles trained on him. Don't shoot, he calls out. I've got news about Reed. Malcolm's head tilts, assessing the voice. Let him approach, Ethan, but keep your rifle ready. The young man dismounts, leading his exhausted horse toward the porch. He's barely 20, with the sun-weathered face of someone who works outdoors. His clothes are dusty from hard riding. My name's Charlie Taylor, he says, stopping a respectful distance from the porch. I work at the livery in Thompson's Crossing. What news do you bring, Charlie? Malcolm asks. Charlie glances nervously between Malcolm and the rifles still partially trained on him. Reed's deputy, Walsh, came into town looking for hired guns. Found them too, Hawkins and his crew. Ethan curses under his breath. Hawkins is bad news. Former cavalry scout turned bounty hunter. Has a reputation for bringing in bodies instead of live captures. Charlie nods vigorously. That's him. Wears an eye patch. Walsh offered 500 for help capturing you, but Hawkins held out for 1,000. He hesitates, then adds, and they know who you are, Mr. Carter, or who you were. Walsh told them you're the ghost. Malcolm's expression remains impassive, but his jaw tightens slightly. How many men does Hawkins have? 4 riding with him, Charlie replies. All gunmen. They're planning to join up with Reed and hit your place tonight. Sarah steps forward. Why are you warning us? You're taking an awful risk. Charlie shifts uncomfortably. My pa was the station agent in Benson Creek 12 years back. 3 men tried to rob the office. Would have killed him too, except... He looks at Malcolm with something approaching awe. Except the ghost appeared out of nowhere. Killed 2 robbers and ran off the 3rd. Malcolm's brow furrows, memory stirring. Benson Creek, small station, red clapboard building with white trim. Charlie's eyes widen. That's it. Pa said you never asked for thanks, just disappeared into the night. But he never forgot. When I heard Walsh talking about the ghost, I knew. I had to warn you. A ghost of a smile touches Malcolm's lips. Seems even ghosts cast long shadows. He extends his hand, which Charlie takes with reverence. Thank you, Charlie. You've given us valuable time to prepare. What can I do to help? Charlie asks eagerly. Malcolm considers this. Can you ride to Harrisville? Our friend Robert Jenkins is headed there to alert Marshal Callahan. If you can catch up to him, tell him we need reinforcements sooner than expected. Charlie straightens, eager to assist the legendary figure. I'll find him, sir. My horse needs rest, but take my bay gelding in the corral. Malcolm interrupts. He's fresh. Leave your mount here to recover. As Charlie hurries to transfer his saddle to the bay, Ethan steps closer to Malcolm. 7 against 3, he murmurs. Not good odds. I've faced worse, Malcolm replies quietly. Sarah's voice is tight with worry. But you could see then, Pa? Malcolm turns toward her voice, his expression softening. Sarah, since losing my sight, I've developed other ways of perceiving the world. Your mother made sure of that. Inside the house, Malcolm runs his fingertips along the table edge, mentally mapping the room. We need to prepare the house, barricade the downstairs windows, create firing positions. Ethan nods. What about the barn and outbuildings? Abandon. Them, Malcolm decides. We don't have enough people to defend multiple positions. The house gives us better protection and clear fields of fire. He turns his face towards Sarah. I need you to understand something, Sarah. These men are coming to kill us. There can be no hesitation. Sarah's voice is steady when she answers. I understand, Pa. I won't hesitate. Malcolm smiles sadly. You sound just like your mother. He straightens, returning to the matter at hand. Ethan, help me move the furniture. We need to create barricades that still allow us to move freely inside. As they work to fortify the house, Malcolm moves with surprising efficiency for a blind man. Years of living in the space have etched every corner, every doorway into his memory. He never falters or misjudges a distance as he helps position heavy furniture against vulnerable windows and doors. Leave the front door accessible until the last minute, he instructs. We want them to think we're unprepared. Sarah retrieves ammunition from the gun cabinet, distributing it to strategic locations throughout the house. Pa, she calls, I found these in the back. She holds up several sticks of dynamite, forgotten remnants from when they blasted a well. Several years ago, Malcolm's head tilts as he listens to her footsteps and the distinctive sound of the dynamite sticks bumping together. A slow smile spreads across his face. Perfect. Place them by the north windows. We may need them. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the yard, they've transformed the comfortable farmhouse into a fortress. Furniture barricades most windows, leaving narrow gaps for rifles. Water buckets stand ready in case of fire. Ammunition is positioned at each defensive position. Malcolm stands in the center of the main room, mentally reviewing their preparations. Ethan, take the back of the house. Sarah, upstairs with the rifle. I'll handle the front. Pa, Sarah protests. You can't. I can. Malcolm interrupts firmly. Trust me, Sarah. This is what I was born to do. The certainty in his voice silences her objections. As she turns to head upstairs, Malcolm catches her arm gently. Sarah, he says softly, no matter what happens tonight, remember that everything I've done, everything I am now, has been for you. The man I was before died the day you were born. Sarah embraces him fiercely. You're my father. That's all that matters to me. As Sarah takes her position upstairs, Ethan approaches Malcolm. There's something we need to discuss, he says quietly. Something that's been bothering me. Malcolm turns toward his voice. What is it? This ledger reads after, Ethan begins. You said you hid it somewhere they'd never look. But after 12 years, why come after it now? What changed? Malcolm is silent for a moment, his unseeing eyes seeming to look inward. The territorial governor is retiring. The man replacing him is mentioned in that ledger. If those connections came to light, it would ruin him before he even took office, Ethan concludes, and probably a lot of other powerful people too. Malcolm nods. The ledger names judges, lawmen, business leaders, all on the payroll of the Prescott Mining Syndicate, men who've spent 12 years climbing to positions of even greater power. So Reed isn't just working for himself, Ethan says thoughtfully. He's their cleaner. Always was, Malcolm confirms. That's why he's so dangerous. He has resources, connections, and the protection of powerful men. He pauses, head tilting slightly. And he's desperate. Men like Reed don't personally lead manhunts unless the stakes are incredibly high. Ethan's voice lowers further. Malcolm, if what you're saying is true, even if we survive tonight, they'll keep coming. A grim smile touches Malcolm's lips. One problem at a time, Ethan. First, we survive the night. 2 miles east of Cottonwood Ranch, Reed waits impatiently beside a small campfire. Blackwood cleans his guns methodically, the metal components gleaming in the firelight. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. They should have been here by now, Reed mutters, checking his pocket watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Blackwood continues his methodical cleaning. Walsh probably had trouble finding Hawkins, or the bastard is negotiating for more money. Reed's cold eyes scan the darkening eastern trail. If he's not here in 30 minutes, we move without them. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of horses reaches them. Reed straightens, hand moving instinctively to his gun. 6 riders appear on the trail, silhouetted against the twilight sky. Walsh leads, followed by Hawkins and his 4 men. Even at a distance, Hawkins is unmistakable. A mountain of a man with an eye patch and a forked beard. Reed watches them approach, assessing each of Hawkins's men with a professional eye. All wear guns like men accustomed to using them. Their faces hard and weathered, perfect for the night's work. Marshal Reed, Walsh calls as they approach, brought you some help. Reed steps forward to meet them, ignoring Walsh and addressing Hawkins directly. I offered 500. Hawkins dismounts, towering over Reed by several inches. His single eye gleams with cunning. And I accepted 1,000. 5 now, 5 when it's done. He extends a massive hand. Unless you'd prefer to tackle the ghost with just your 2 deputies. Reed's jaw tightens, but he reaches into his vest and produces a roll of bills. 500 now. He agrees, reluctantly counting out the money. The rest when Carter is in custody. Hawkins pockets the cash with a crooked smile. I hear he's blind now. That true? So he claims, Reed replies, but he's still dangerous. Don't underestimate him. The ghost of Laramie Basin, one of Hawkins's men murmurs, a note of unease in his voice. They say he killed 30 men. 32, Hawkins corrects. If the stories are true. He turns to Reed. What's the plan, Marshal? Reed gestures for them to gather around. Carter's holed up in his ranch house with his daughter and brother-in-law. The property looks like this. He sketches a rough map in the dirt with a stick. Main house here. Barn and outbuildings here and here. Open ground between, about 50 yards. Defenses? Hawkins asks. Unknown, Reed admits, but they know we're coming. They'll be prepared. Hawkins studies the crude map. Direct assault would be costly. Better to draw them out. Reed shakes his head. We need Carter alive. He has information I require. The others? Hawkins inquires casually. Reed's expression darkens. Collateral damage if necessary, but Carter lives. Hawkins nods, a predatory smile spreading beneath his forked beard. So we surround the house, cut off the escape. And then what? Ask nicely. Smoke them out, Reed decides. Set fire to the barn first. When they're distracted, hit the house from multiple directions. One of Hawkins's men speaks up. What about the girl? Carter's daughter? Reed's eyes are cold as winter. Ice. Use her as leverage if you can. Carter will cooperate to protect her. Hawkins assigns positions to his men, their experienced eyes evaluating the crude map and planning approaches. Reed watches their efficiency with satisfaction. These are men who have done similar work before. We move in 1 hour, Reed announces, after full dark. As the men check weapons and prepare for the attack, Hawkins pulls Reed aside. "There's something else you should know," he says quietly. "The bounty on the ghost was never officially withdrawn. It still stands at $20,000. Reed's eyes narrow. "This isn't about bounties, Hawkins. It's about the ledger." Hawkins shrugs his massive shoulders. "For you, maybe. My men are motivated by cash, not paperwork." His single eye studies Reed. "Just so we understand each other. Once Carter gives you what you want, the bounty is fair game." Reed considers this, then nods slowly. "After I get what I need, he's all yours." Hawkins grins, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Then we have a deal, Marshal." He turns to join his men, but pauses. "One last thing. Is it true what they say about him? That he can shoot a man between the eyes at 100 paces without even seeing the target?" Reed's expression darkens. 12 years ago, I saw him kill 3 men in the time it takes to draw a single breath. Blindness may have slowed him, but don't let it fool you." His hand unconsciously touches a long-healed scar on his cheek. The ghost earned his reputation. As darkness envelops Cottonwood Ranch, Malcolm sits alone on the front porch, seemingly exposed and vulnerable. His silver-inlaid revolvers gleam softly in the moonlight. To anyone watching, he appears to be an old blind man keeping silent vigil. In reality, he's listening. His ears, trained by years of darkness, detect sounds far beyond normal hearing. The rustle of leaves in the cottonwood grove north of the house, the distant hoot of an owl hunting in the fields to the west, the soft whisper of wind through the grass. Ethan steps onto the porch, moving quietly but not quietly enough to escape Malcolm's notice. "They're coming," Malcolm says without turning. 8 horses approaching from the east, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. Ethan strains his ears but hears nothing. "How far?" "Half a mile, give or take," Malcolm replies. "Get inside. Tell Sarah it's time." As Ethan retreats into the house, Malcolm remains seated, apparently unaware of the approaching danger. His hands rest casually on his lap, inches from his holstered revolvers. "Come on, Reed," he murmurs into the darkness. "Let's finish what we started 12 years ago." Inside, Sarah takes her position at an upstairs window, rifle ready. Her hands are steady despite the fear coursing through her. She watches her father on the porch below, marveling at his calm in the face of approaching violence. Ethan moves between defensive positions, checking ammunition one final time. "Remember," he tells Sarah, "aim for the center of mass. Don't try for fancy shots." Sarah nods, her young face set with determination. "I won't let Pa down." In the darkness beyond the ranch, 8 riders dismount, tethering their horses to a grove of trees. They move forward on foot, spreading out to approach the house from multiple directions. Reed signals Hawkins and 2 of his men to circle around. To the rear, Walsh and Blackwood take up positions covering the sides of the house. Reed and the remaining 2 gunmen approach from the front. None of them realizes that Malcolm tracks their movements by sound alone, his acute hearing painting a detailed picture of their positions. As Reed and his companions creep closer, Malcolm finally stands, stretching as if simply enjoying the night air. "Right on time," he says clearly into the darkness. "I've been expecting you, Reed." The sudden announcement freezes the attackers momentarily. Reed recovers first, stepping into the moonlight 20 yards from the porch, his gun drawn. "Carter," he calls out, "or should I say Ghost, I see your hearing is as sharp as ever." Malcolm turns toward Reed's voice, a thin smile crossing his weathered face. "Sharp enough to know you've brought friends, 7 of them to be exact." He gestures to the shadows where the other men hide. "Isn't that right, Hawkins? Still favoring that bad knee from the Cheyenne job?" A startled curse comes from the darkness as Hawkins realizes Malcolm has identified him. Reed's eyes narrow. "Impressive. Trick, but party games won't save you tonight." He raises his voice. "We have the house surrounded. There's no escape." Malcolm descends the porch steps with surprising confidence for a blind man, stopping at the bottom. Who said anything about escaping? The challenge in his voice is unmistakable. Reed signals his men to hold their positions, unwilling to spring whatever trap Malcolm might have prepared. Last chance, Ghost, Reed offers. Tell me where the ledger is, and maybe your daughter lives through the night. At the mention of Sarah, something dangerous flashes across Malcolm's face, a glimpse of the killer he once was. You shouldn't have brought her into this, Reed. Reed smirks. Sentiment, your greatest weakness. He takes a step closer. The ledger. Where is it? Malcolm stands unnaturally still, only his coat moving slightly in the evening breeze. If I give you the ledger, what then? We shake hands and part as friends? Reed laughs humorlessly. You know better than that. But I promise your daughter won't suffer such generosity. Malcolm replies, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But I have a counter-offer. His blind eyes seem to find Reed unerringly in the darkness. Walk away now. Forget the ledger. Forget me. And you might live to see the morning. Reed's face contorts with rage. You're blind and outnumbered. You're in no position to make threats. Malcolm's response is chilling in its calm certainty. I don't make threats, Reed. Only promises. The tension stretches between them like a drawn bowstring. Then Reed signals Hawkins with a sharp nod. From the darkness behind the house comes the crash of breaking glass, followed by a flicker of orange light. The barn is ablaze. Now, Reed says with cold satisfaction, let's try this again. Orange flames lick the night sky as the barn burns, casting dancing shadows across the yard. The fire creates a backdrop of hellish light behind the ranch house, silhouetting it against the inferno. The crackling roar fills the air, momentarily masking other sounds of the night. Malcolm tilts his head, adjusting to this new auditory landscape. The fire changes everything, altering air currents, creating new sounds, masking others. He needs to recalibrate his senses quickly. That's our livelihood you're burning, Reed, Malcolm calls out, his voice carrying over the fire's roar. Generations of work. Just the beginning, Reed responds coldly. Next comes the house unless you start talking. Inside, Sarah watches from her upstairs window, fighting back tears as the barn, where she learned to ride her first pony, where she helped birth countless foals, becomes a towering column of flame. Her rifle remains steady, aimed at Reed's chest, but she hesitates, awaiting her father's signal. Ethan moves silently to Malcolm's side, speaking in a whisper only Malcolm can hear. They're spreading out, 2 men moving toward the water trough for cover, 3 circling behind. Malcolm nods imperceptibly. Sarah has Reed in her sights. When I give the word, she takes him. That'll scatter the others. You handle the 2 by the trough. I'll deal with the ones in back. And Hawkins, Ethan murmurs. He'll hold back, wait for an advantage. Malcolm's fingers flex near his revolvers. Let's disappoint him. Reed takes another step forward, growing impatient. The ledger, Ghost. Now. Malcolm's stance shifts subtly, feet positioned for stability, weight balanced. To most observers, it would appear casual. To Reed, who has seen gunfighters prepare for death, the significance is unmistakable. Last warning, Reed, Malcolm announces, his voice carrying across the yard. Take your men and leave. Reed's laugh is harsh in the firelit darkness. Or what? You'll shoot us all. You can't even see. Malcolm's weathered face remains impassive, but something deadly flickers behind his milky eyes. Sarah, he calls out calmly, now would be a good time. The rifle shot from the upstairs window cracks through the night. Reed dives aside, the bullet grazing his shoulder instead of finding his heart. His surprised cry triggers chaos. Hawkins's men open fire from their positions around the house, bullets splintering wood and shattering windows. The world erupts into violence. Ethan drops to one knee, firing methodically at the men near the water trough. One falls immediately, clutching his chest. The other returns fire, forcing Ethan to duck behind a porch column. Malcolm moves with shocking speed for a blind man. As bullets whine past him, he draws both revolvers in a fluid motion and fires toward the sound of footsteps behind the house. A scream confirms his accuracy. Without pausing, he rolls behind a rain barrel as return fire splinters the porch where he stood moments before. "She missed!" Blackwood shouts from his position by the corral. "The girl missed Reed." "Shut up and I keep firing," Reed bellows, clutching his bleeding shoulder as he scrambles for cover behind a woodpile. Inside the house, Sarah cycles her rifle bolt and takes aim again, this time at Blackwood. Her finger tightens on the trigger. The rifle cracks. Blackwood jerks backward, dropping his gun as Sarah's bullet finds his thigh. "Pa!" Sarah calls out. "Blackwood's hit but not down." Malcolm, hearing her voice through the gunfire, adjusts his mental map of the battlefield. "Ethan, cover me!" Ethan provides suppressing fire as Malcolm darts toward the house entrance, moving, with the confidence of a man who can see. As he reaches the doorway, a bullet grazes his arm. He spins, firing twice toward the source. There's a grunt of pain, then the heavy thud of a body falling. Inside, Malcolm presses his back against the wall, catching his breath. "Report," he demands. "Two down for certain," Ethan responds, reloading quickly. Blackwood wounded, Reed's hit but still fighting. The others. "Three spreading out behind the house," Sarah calls from upstairs. "Hawkins is directing them from the Cottonwood Grove." Malcolm nods, processing this tactical picture. "They're trying to flank us. Sarah, watch the back windows. Ethan, hold this front position." "What about you?" Ethan asks. Malcolm checks his revolvers, reloading spent chambers with practiced efficiency. "I'm going to even the odds." "Malcolm, that's suicide," Ethan protests. "You can't—" "Trust me," Malcolm interrupts. "This is what I was born to do." Before Ethan can argue further, Malcolm slips through the kitchen toward the back door. He moves silently, his steps unerring despite the obstacles in his path. Years of living in darkness have mapped every inch of this house in his mind. Outside, Reed rallies his remaining men. "Surround the house! No one escapes!" Two of Hawkins's men approach the back of the house cautiously, rifles ready. They communicate with hand signals, planning to breach through the kitchen door. The first man reaches for the doorknob. The door explodes outward, catching him square in the face. As he staggers backward, Malcolm emerges like a spectre from the darkness. Both revolvers roar in rapid succession. The first man collapses without a sound. The second manages to fire a wild shot before Malcolm's bullet finds his chest. In the Cottonwood Grove, Hawkins watches through his brass spyglass as Malcolm dispatches his men with terrifying efficiency. "Blind my ass," he mutters. Turning to his remaining gunmen, he points toward the burning barn. "Circle around through the smoke. The old man may be good, but he can't see through fire." Malcolm stands motionless in the yard, head tilted as he listens for movement. The fire complicates everything, its roar masking subtler sounds. He can sense someone approaching but can't pinpoint the location. From his position behind the woodpile, Reed sees Malcolm standing exposed in the open yard. He raises his pistol, aiming carefully despite his wounded shoulder. At this range, even he can't miss. "Pa, get down!" Sarah screams from the upstairs window, spotting Reed's intent. Her warning comes just as Reed fires. Malcolm drops and rolls with supernatural quickness. Reed's bullet winds harmlessly overhead. In one fluid motion, Malcolm comes up kneeling, both revolvers extended toward Reed's position. They fire simultaneously. Reed howls as Malcolm's bullet shatters his right wrist, sending his gun spinning into the dirt. "Kill him!" he shrieks to his remaining men. "Kill them all!" Blackwood, despite his leg wound, manages to stagger toward Reed. "We need to pull back," he urges, helping Reed to his feet. "The ghost, he's not human." "Not without the ledger," Reed snarls, clutching his shattered wrist. In the confusion, Hawkins's remaining gunman uses the smoke from the burning barn as cover. He circles behind Malcolm, rifle raised for a killing shot. Malcolm, overwhelmed, by the cacophony of the fire, fails to detect the approach. The rifle shot cracks across the yard. Malcolm jerks, expecting pain, but feels nothing. Behind him, Hawkins's man collapses, a bullet hole neatly centered between his eyes. Sarah Chambers, another round in her rifle, her young face set with grim determination. The girl who spent her childhood helping birth foals is gone, replaced by a woman defending her home and father. Malcolm, recognizing what happened, raises a hand in silent thanks toward the house before disappearing into the smoke from the burning. Reed, supported by Blackwood, retreats toward the cottonwood grove where Hawkins waits. "This isn't over," he gasps through pain, "not by a long shot." Hawkins watches the burning ranch with his single eye, reassessing the situation. The ghost lives up to his reputation, even blind. "He's not blind," Reed insists. "It's an act. Has to be." Hawkins shrugs his massive shoulders. "Act or not, he just killed 3 of my best men. That doubles my price." Reed glares at him through pain-narrowed eyes. "You'll get paid when we succeed, not before." "Then we need a new strategy," Hawkins says coolly. "Direct assault clearly isn't working." Reed nods grimly, an idea forming through his pain. "The girl. We need the girl." As the gunfire subsides, Malcolm returns to the house, moving with less grace than before. Exhaustion edges his movements, the strain of combat showing in his posture. "Report," he says, as Ethan secures the door behind him. 4 dead for certain, Ethan confirms. Reed and Blackwood wounded but alive. They've retreated to the cottonwood grove with Hawkins and possibly 1 more. Malcolm nods, processing this information. "Sarah?" "I'm here, Pa," she calls, descending the stairs. "Are you hurt?" Malcolm shakes his head. "Just tired. It's been a long time since I've danced that particular dance." Sarah reaches him, her hands gently checking him for injuries despite his assurances. "You moved like you could see," she says wonderingly. "How?" A tired smile crosses Malcolm's face. "Your mother's doing. After I lost my sight, she made me memorize every inch of this ranch, made me practice moving by sound alone." His hand finds Sarah's shoulder. "She was preparing me for this day, though neither of us wanted to believe it would come." "You think they'll try again?" Ethan asks, peering cautiously through a window. "Without question," Malcolm confirms. "Reed won't stop until he has the ledger or he's dead." He moves to the kitchen table, his fingers finding a canteen. He drinks deeply, then passes it to Sarah. They'll be more cautious now, more strategic. Sarah accepts the canteen, studying her father with new eyes. "Those men you killed would have killed us without hesitation," Malcolm finishes gently. "I take no pleasure in it, Sarah." She nods, understanding. "What now?" Malcolm, his unseeing eyes turned toward the window where the glow of the burning barn is beginning to subside. They'll wait until dawn, regroup, tend their wounds. And then, Ethan presses, then they'll try something different. Malcolm's expression darkens. Reed is cruel, but he's not stupid. He knows he can't take us in a direct fight now, not with half his men down. "So what will he do?" Sarah asks. Malcolm's face is grim. "Something we won't expect." In the cottonwood grove, Reed sits propped against a tree while Blackwood bandages his shattered wrist. The pain is excruciating, but Reed's cold eyes show only rage, not suffering. 4 men dead, Hawkins says, cleaning his rifle methodically. "Half our force. And for what? We're no closer to the ledger." "We will be," Reed insists through clenched teeth. "Once we have the girl." Hawkins raises an eyebrow. "And how do you propose we get her? She's as good with that rifle as her father." "Is with his revolvers." Reed's eyes gleam with malice in the moonlight. "Walsh, come here." The tracker approaches cautiously, wary of Reed's unpredictable temper. "Yes, Marshal." "You said Carter has a brother-in-law." "This Ethan." Reed winces as Blackwood tightens the bandage. Does he have his own place? Walsh nods slowly. Small homestead about 3 miles west. Why? A cruel smile spreads across Reed's face. Perfect. Blackwood, how's your leg? Blackwood grimaces, testing his wounded thigh. I can ride. Good, Reed says. You and Walsh saddle up. Ride to this Ethan's place. Find anything you can use. Letters, photographs, personal items. Anything that might have sentimental value. Understanding dawns in Walsh's eyes. Leverage. Reed nods. We trade these items for the ledger. Carter won't care about sentimental trinkets, Hawkins objects. Not enough to give up the ledger. He won't, Reed agrees. But his daughter might. He shifts, adjusting his position against the tree. While they're gone, you and I will work on our message to Carter. What message? Hawkins asks suspiciously. Reed's eyes glitter with malevolent purpose, one that will make it very clear what happens if he doesn't cooperate. As the night deepens, an uneasy quiet settles over Cottonwood Ranch. The barn has burned to smoldering embers, casting an eerie red glow across the yard. Inside the house, Ethan keeps watch at the front windows while Sarah tends to minor wounds. Malcolm sustained during the fighting. Hold still, Pa, she murmurs, dabbing iodine on a bullet graze along his forearm. Malcolm barely winces, his mind elsewhere. Something's not right, he says quietly. They're too quiet. Ethan glances back from his position at the window. Maybe they've given up. 4 dead men is a steep price. Malcolm shakes his head. Reed won't give up, not when he's this close. His fingers tap thoughtfully against the table. He's planning something. Sarah finishes bandaging his arm. Whatever it is, we'll be ready. Will we? Malcolm muses. Reed is desperate now. Wounded animals are the most dangerous. A sudden sound outside brings them all to alert. Ethan raises his rifle, peering into the darkness. Horse approaching. Single rider. Malcolm rises, head tilted as he listens. Slow pace, not threatening. One of Reed's men, Sarah asks, reaching for her rifle. Malcolm concentrates, focusing his hearing. No, different horse, heavier gait. It stopped at the edge of the yard, Ethan reports. Riders dismounting. They wait in tense silence. Then a voice calls from the darkness. Carter, got a message for you. Malcolm recognizes Hawkins's gravelly voice. What's the message? He calls back. Got something you might want to see. Hawkins shouts. Or have described to you given your condition. Malcolm's jaw tightens. Show me. There's a moment of silence, then the sound of something heavy being dragged. Hawkins emerges from the darkness into the yard, hauling what appears to be a burlap-wrapped bundle. Don't shoot, Hawkins calls, dropping the bundle in the open yard. Just delivering this. Compliments of Marshal Reed. With that, he retreats quickly to his horse and gallops away. Ethan keeps his rifle trained on the mysterious bundle. Could be a trap. Dynamite, maybe. Malcolm shakes his head. No, Reed wants something from us. Blowing us up defeats that purpose. He moves toward the door. Cover me! Pa, no! Sarah protests. Let Ethan go. He can see. I need Ethan covering me, Malcolm insists. And I need you to watch the cottonwoods. This could be a diversion. Before further objections can be raised, Malcolm steps outside, moving cautiously toward the bundle. His acute hearing detects no ticking, no fuse burning. Just the normal sounds of the night, slowly returning after the gunfight. He kneels beside the bundle, his sensitive fingers exploring its contours. Burlap wrapped around something solid, not a box, irregular shape. He finds the edge of the burlap and pulls it back. His fingers touch something that makes his blood run cold. Hair. Human hair. Ethan, he calls, his voice tight. I need your eyes. Ethan approaches cautiously, rifle still ready. When he sees what lies beneath the burlap, he curses violently. What is it? Malcolm demands. Ethan's voice is strained. A warning! One of Hawkins's men, the one Sarah shot. He swallows hard. They've cut off his head. Malcolm's face hardens into a mask of cold fury. He feels further finding a piece of paper pinned to the burlap. There's a note. Read it. Ethan takes the paper with a trembling hand. Ghost, this is just the beginning. By sunrise, we'll have visited your brother-in-law's homestead. Next time, the head might belong to someone you care about. The ledger for your family's safety. You have until dawn to decide. Leave it at the crossroads south of your property. Come alone. Malcolm stands slowly, his unseeing eyes turned toward the cottonwood grove where Reed waits. Take this inside, he says, gesturing to the grisly delivery. Bury it when there's time. What are we going to do? Ethan asks, recovering the severed head. Malcolm's voice is ice. Spring their trap. Back inside, Sarah learns of Reed's grotesque message. Her face pales, but her voice remains steady. They're going to Uncle Ethan's house. Why? Looking for leverage, Malcolm explains, checking his revolvers methodically. Personal items, correspondence, anything they can use to manipulate us. But there's nothing there, Ethan says. Haven't lived there in months. Been staying here. Since Eliza died, Malcolm nods thoughtfully. They don't know that. Gives us an advantage. He turns to Sarah. What time is it? She checks the mantel clock. Just past midnight. 4 hours until dawn, Malcolm calculates. Enough time. For what? Ethan asks. Malcolm's expression is resolute. To end this, once and for all. Sarah steps closer, concern evident in her voice. Pa, what are you planning? Reed wants the ledger, Malcolm says simply. I'm going to give it to him. What? Ethan exclaims. After all this? After 12 years of hiding it? A grim smile touches Malcolm's lips. I didn't say I'd give him the real ledger. Understanding dawns in Ethan's eyes. A fake, Malcolm nods. Sarah, fetch me paper, ink, and a pen. Ethan, I need you to write what I dictate. He turns toward his daughter. And Sarah, I need you to find your mother's journal, the one in the cedar chest. As they gather the requested items, Malcolm outlines his plan. Reed is expecting me to deliver the ledger at dawn. I'll give him exactly what he expects. Names, dates, amounts. All fabricated, of course. He'll know it's fake eventually, Ethan points out as he prepares to write. Eventually, Malcolm agrees, but not immediately. It'll buy us time. His fingers touch the revolvers at his sides. Time I'll use to my advantage. Sarah returns with her mother's journal, placing it in Malcolm's hands. What do you need this for? Malcolm's expression softens as his fingers trace the familiar cover. Your mother kept more than memories in here. He finds the spine, his nimble fingers working at the binding until it separates slightly. From within the hidden compartment, he withdraws a small key. This opens a safety deposit box in the Harrisville Bank. That's where the real ledger has been for 12 years. Ethan stares in astonishment. All this time, it wasn't even here? Safest place for it, Malcolm confirms. Reed would never think to look in such an obvious location. Sarah watches her father with newfound admiration. You planned for this possibility all along. Malcolm's face shows a flash of the strategic mind that once made the ghost so formidable. Your mother's idea, actually. She was always the clever one. As Ethan begins transcribing Malcolm's dictated list of names and fictional crimes, Sarah sits beside her father. What happens after you give Reed the fake ledger? He won't just let us go. No, Malcolm agrees, his voice hardening. He won't. Then, what's the real plan? She presses. Malcolm's unseeing eyes seem to look into the distance, calculating possibilities she can only imagine. Reed believes he's setting a trap for me. His hand finds Sarah's, squeezing it gently. But the ghost was always the hunter, never the prey. The night deepens as they prepare for dawn, each lost in their own thoughts about what the coming hours will bring. Outside, an owl calls mournfully from the cottonwood grove, the only witness to the deadly game unfolding between predators. The hours before dawn stretch endlessly. Malcolm sits at the kitchen table, his hands moving across the pages Ethan has written, fingers tracing the ink to confirm the convincing forgery of names, dates, and incriminating transactions. The fake ledger is nearly complete, a collection of fabricated evidence that would fool anyone not intimately familiar with the original. Add Andrew Clayton, territorial judge, Malcolm instructs. $50,000 paid in quarterly installments, over 2 years, dates beginning January 1872. Ethan's pen scratches across the paper. Clayton was actually honest, as I recall. Precisely, Malcolm confirms. Anyone investigating will discover that quickly. It'll cast doubt on the entire document. A thin smile crosses his weathered face. Seeds of confusion. That's all we need to plant. Sarah enters from the back room, carrying Malcolm's battered leather saddlebags. Found these, Pa. They should hold the ledger. Malcolm nods appreciatively. Perfect. We need to make this look convincing. You still haven't explained exactly what you're planning, Sarah says, concern evident in her voice. Reed won't be alone at the crossroads. He'll have Hawkins and whatever men they have left. I'm counting on it, Malcolm replies cryptically. Ethan looks up from his writing. You're not seriously planning to go alone? Of course not, Malcolm assures him. I need you both with me. He pauses, head tilting slightly toward the window. Do you hear that? Ethan and Sarah listen, but hear nothing unusual. What is it? Sarah asks. Horses approaching. 2 riders, Malcolm says confidently. Coming from the west. Ethan moves to the window, peering cautiously into the darkness. I don't see... Wait. There they are. He raises his rifle instinctively. Malcolm rises, moving to Ethan's side. Easy. That's Robert Jenkins, and someone's with him. Sarah joins them at the window. Charlie, she says with surprise, recognizing the second rider. They made it back already, and they're riding hard, Malcolm observes, listening to the urgent rhythm of hoofbeats. Something's wrong. Minutes later, Robert and Charlie burst through the door, both men breathing heavily from their hard ride. Their faces are grim with urgency. Mr. Carter, Robert gasps. Marshal Callahan's dead. Murdered 3 days ago. Malcolm's face darkens. How? Charlie steps forward, shot in the back while making his rounds. The town's in chaos. No law for 50 miles. Reed's doing, Malcolm concludes. He's been planning this for longer than I thought. Robert nods grimly. There's more. We passed Ethan's homestead on the way back. 2 men were ransacking the place. One had a bandaged leg. Blackwood, Ethan mutters. We stayed hidden, Charlie adds. They loaded some things into saddlebags and headed back this way. That was about an hour ago. Malcolm processes this information, adjusting his mental calculations. You've done well, both of you, but our situation has become more complicated. He gestures toward the table. Come, sit. We need to revise our strategy. As they gather around the kitchen table, Malcolm outlines the situation, Reed's ultimatum, the fake ledger, the planned meeting at the crossroads. Robert and Charlie listen. With growing concern, 5 against 4, Robert calculates. Better odds than before, but they'll be expecting a trap. Which is why we won't set one, Malcolm says. At least not the kind they're expecting. Sarah studies her father's face, trying to decipher his thoughts. What are you thinking, Pa? Malcolm's expression reveals nothing. Reed believes he knows what will happen at dawn. Man like him, he's already envisioned how it will play out, probably a dozen times. His fingers tap thoughtfully against the table. Our advantage lies in doing the unexpected, such as... Ethan prompts. Malcolm reaches for the saddlebags Sarah brought. First, we make the fake ledger look authentic, weathered, well-handled. He turns toward Charlie. You mentioned Blackwood and Walsh took items from Ethan's homestead? Charlie nods. Looked like letters, some photographs, small things. As expected, Malcolm says, they'll use those to pressure us. He stands, decision made. Here's what we're going to do. In the cottonwood grove, Reed sits propped against a tree, his shattered wrist throbbing, despite the laudanum Hawkins had produced from his saddlebags. The pain fuels his rage, sharpening his focus on the coming confrontation. Carter's no fool, he tells Hawkins, who sits nearby cleaning his rifle. He'll suspect a trap. Hawkins nods, working a ramrod through the barrel. Man like the ghost, he doesn't live to his age by being careless. Exactly why we need leverage. Reed glances eastward impatiently. Blackwood and Walsh should have been back by now. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses reaches them. Walsh and Blackwood emerge from the darkness, their saddlebags bulging. Found plenty, Blackwood announces, dismounting awkwardly with his wounded leg. He dumps the contents of his saddlebag onto a blanket spread before Reed. Letters, photographs, a woman's silver hand mirror, and various small keepsakes form a pile of intimate memories, the physical remnants of lives lived and loved. Reed sorts through them with his good hand, examining each item. Perfect, he murmurs, holding up a daguerreotype of a beautiful woman, standing beside a younger Malcolm Carter. Eliza Carter's gentle eyes seem to look directly at Reed, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Carter's wife, pregnant with the girl. Walsh adds his findings to the pile. Found these hidden under a floorboard. Seemed important. Reed examines the new items, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a small jewelry box containing a wedding band, and a child's wooden toy horse, lovingly carved and painted. Sentimental value, Reed confirms with satisfaction. Precisely what we need. He selects several letters and the daguerreotype. When Carter arrives at the crossroads, these will persuade him we're serious about destroying everything he holds. Dear, Hawkins watches the proceedings with growing unease. You're assuming he'll bring the ledger. What if he doesn't? Reed's eyes gleam with malice in the firelight. Then we kill the girl, slowly. While he listens, he holds up one of the letters. But he'll bring it. A man like Carter, the man he is now, not the ghost he was. He values family above all. His voice hardens. It's his weakness, and we're going to exploit it. And after we have the ledger, Blackwood asks, adjusting the bandage on his leg. A cold smile spreads across Reed's face, then Hawkins collects his bounty. The first hint of dawn paints the eastern horizon with pale gold. Malcolm stands on the porch of Cottonwood Ranch, dressed in his customary clothes, but with one significant addition. His gun belt, the silver-inlaid revolvers gleaming in the early light. Sarah joins him, her own rifle slung across her back. It's almost time, she says softly. Malcolm nods, unseeing eyes turned toward the lightening sky. Your mother loved this time of day, he says unexpectedly. Said it was when the world held its breath, waiting to be reborn. Sarah takes his hand. She would be proud of you, Pa, of both of us. A sad smile crosses Malcolm's face. She'd be furious, actually, making you part of this danger. He squeezes her hand. But yes, she'd be proud of what you've become. Ethan, Robert, and Charlie emerge from the house, each armed and solemn-faced. The gravity of the coming confrontation weighs heavily on them all. Everything's ready, Ethan confirms, just as you outlined. Malcolm nods. Remember, timing is crucial. One misstep, we know, Robert assures him. We'll be there. Malcolm turns toward Charlie. You're certain you want to be part of this? There's no shame in riding out. Charlie straightens, resolve evident in his young face. My pa owes his life to the ghost. That makes this my fight too. Malcolm accepts this with a nod of respect. Mount up then. Dawn waits for no man. The 5 riders leave Cottonwood Ranch as the first rays of sunlight spill across the prairie. They ride in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. For Malcolm, every sound, the creak of saddle leather, the rhythmic breathing of his horse, the soft whisper of wind through grass, forms a detailed map of the world around him. He doesn't need eyes to know the land they traverse. It's imprinted, On his soul, the crossroads lies 3 miles south of the ranch, a simple intersection of dirt roads marked by a weather-beaten signpost. As they approach, Malcolm raises his hand, signaling the others to stop. "They're already there," he says quietly. 5 of them spread out. Ethan squints toward the crossroads, barely visible in the growing light. "I don't see anyone." "Trust me," Malcolm insists. "Reed's behind the signpost. Hawkins is in that drainage ditch to the east. The others are positioned to surround anyone who approaches." He turns toward his companions. "Remember the plan. No heroics." With that final instruction, Malcolm continues forward alone, the saddlebags containing the fake ledger draped across his saddle horn. The others hold their positions, watching anxiously as the blind rancher rides directly into danger. 50 yards from the crossroads, Malcolm calls out, "That's far enough, Reed. Show yourself." A moment of silence follows, then Reed steps out from behind the signpost, his shattered wrist bandaged and supported by a makeshift sling. "Impressive, Ghost," he calls back. "Your hearing is as legendary as your aim." Malcolm reins his horse to a stop. "Where are your men?" Reed smiles coldly. "Close enough to kill you before you could draw those fancy revolvers." "But that's not why we're here, is it?" He gestures with his good hand. "The ledger, you brought it?" Malcolm pats the saddlebags. "As requested, but first I want assurances." Reed laughs humorlessly. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "On the contrary," Malcolm counters calmly, "I'm the only one who knows if this is the real ledger or a convincing fake. Kill me, and you'll never know for certain." Reed's eyes narrow. "What assurances?" "My family remains unharmed," Malcolm states firmly. "You take the ledger and disappear. This ends today." Reed pretends to consider this. "Reasonable terms. Though I'll need to verify the ledger's authenticity first." Malcolm nods toward the saddlebags. "It's all there. Every name, every transaction. 12 years of waiting ends now." Reed steps forward, his movements cautious. "Toss the bags." Slowly, Malcolm removes the saddlebags from his saddle horn. "First, return what you took from Ethan's homestead, the personal items." Reed smiles thinly. "Insurance, Ghost. They remain with me until I've verified the ledger." Malcolm's jaw tightens, but he nods. "Very well." He tosses the saddlebags, which land at Reed's feet. Reed kneels awkwardly, hampered by his wounded wrist. He opens the bags one-handed, pulling out a leather-bound book. Flipping through it with his thumb, he scans the pages of names, dates, and amounts. "Governor Ellsworth," he reads aloud. "Judge Hollister, Marshal Bryce." A satisfied smile spreads across his face. "It appears to be in order." "It's all there," Malcolm confirms. "Now keep your end of the bargain." Reed closes the ledger, tucking it into his coat. "Of course." He whistles sharply. From their hidden positions, Hawkins, Blackwood, Walsh, and the remaining gunmen emerge, weapons drawn and aimed at Malcolm. "Did you really think I'd let you ride away, Ghost?" Reed asks, his voice dripping with malice. "After what you did to me in Prescott." Malcolm remains unnaturally still in his saddle. "I wondered when we'd get to this part." Reed gestures to his men, who begin to circle around Malcolm. 12 years I've hunted you. 12 years of knowing the ghost was out there somewhere, living a peaceful life, while I carried the shame of letting him escape." His face contorts with rage. "You were the best, and I'll be remembered as the man who finally killed you." Malcolm's unseeing eyes seem to find Reed unerringly. "Is that what this is about, Reed? Your legacy, your pride?" "It's about justice," Reed snarls. "No," Malcolm contradicts calmly. "It's about ego. Always was." He shifts slightly in his saddle. "Tell me something, Reed. That day in Prescott when you and your men cornered me at Willow Creek, did you ever wonder why I didn't kill you when I had the chance?" Reed's expression falters momentarily. "You tried, put a bullet in my cheek." Malcolm shakes his head. "If I'd wanted you dead, you would be. I aimed to wound, not kill." His voice grows softer. I saw something in you that day, a chance for redemption, a possibility that you might become something better than what you were. Sentiment, Reed spits, your greatest weakness. Perhaps, Malcolm acknowledges, but it's also why I'm still alive, and half your men aren't. He tilts his head slightly. One last chance, Reed. Take the ledger and go. Live whatever life you can make for yourself. Reed laughs bitterly. The great ghost of Laramie Basin offering mercy. He draws his pistol with his left hand. I don't want your mercy. I want your legend. Hawkins, kill him. Hawkins raises his rifle, taking careful aim at Malcolm's chest. His finger tightens on the trigger. The shot cracks across the open prairie, but it's not from Hawkins's rifle. The bounty hunter jerks backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as a bullet from an unseen source strikes his shoulder. He drops to one knee, his rifle falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. What the? Reed begins, spinning to locate the source of the shot. Chaos erupts at the crossroads. Sarah, positioned on a distant ridge with her rifle, cycles the bolt and fires again. Blackwood falls, clutching his chest. From another direction, Robert and Charlie open fire, forcing Walsh and the remaining gunmen to dive for cover. Reed, momentarily stunned by the ambush, recovers quickly. He fires at Malcolm, who throws himself from his saddle as the bullet passes. Through the space he occupied a heartbeat before, Malcolm hits the ground rolling, drawing both revolvers as he comes up into a shooter's crouch. Despite his blindness, he fires with uncanny accuracy toward the sound of Reed's labored breathing. The bullet grazes Reed's good arm, eliciting a howl of pain and rage. "Kill him!" Reed screams to his remaining men. "Kill them all!" Malcolm moves, like smoke, using sound to track his enemies. Walsh tries to flank him, boots scraping on gravel. Malcolm pivots and fires twice. The first shot misses, but the second finds Walsh's thigh, dropping him to the ground. Hawkins, despite his wounded shoulder, manages to draw his pistol. He fires at Malcolm, the bullet singing past the blind gunman's ear. Malcolm responds instantly, 2 shots in rapid succession. Hawkins grunts as both bullets find their mark, one in his chest, one in his throat. He collapses, blood pooling beneath him. The remaining gunman, seeing his companions fall, loses his nerve. He turns to flee, only to be cut down by a shot from Ethan's position. Reed stands alone, his left arm now bleeding alongside his shattered right wrist. He stares in disbelief as Malcolm approaches, revolvers still smoking in. His hands. "How?" Reed gasps. "You're blind." Malcolm's expression is impassive. "I don't need eyes to sense a snake, Reed." Reed backs away, his gun wavering. He fires wildly, the bullet passing harmlessly over Malcolm's shoulder. Malcolm responds with mechanical precision, shooting Reed's gun from his hand. The weapon spins away, leaving Reed disarmed and cornered. "Finish it!" Reed snarls, defiant even in defeat. "Do what you should have done 12 years ago." Malcolm stands perfectly still, revolvers trained on Reed's chest. The moment stretches, taut with possibility. Then, slowly, deliberately, Malcolm lowers his guns. "No," he says quietly, "I'm not the ghost anymore. Haven't been for a long time." Reed's face contorts with rage and disbelief. "You can't just walk away. Not after everything." "I can," Malcolm contradicts, "and I will." He holsters one revolver, keeping the other trained on Reed. "But you're coming with us, to Harrisville. What's left of the territorial court can decide your fate." Sarah, Ethan, Robert and Charlie converge on the crossroads, weapons ready but no longer needed. They find Malcolm standing over the defeated Reed, the legendary ghost, transformed once more into a simple rancher, albeit one with extraordinary abilities. "It's over," Malcolm announces as they approach. "Bind him. We're taking him in." As Ethan secures Reed's hands, the defeated man glares at Malcolm with undiluted hatred. "You think this ends here? People will still come for you, Ghost." The bounty still stands. Malcolm's weathered face shows no concern. "Let them come." He turns toward his daughter's approaching footsteps. "We'll be ready." Sarah reaches her father's side, relief evident in her voice. "You did it, Pa." Malcolm's hand finds her shoulder. "We did it." His unseeing eyes turn toward the rising sun, feeling its warmth on his face. "Your mother would be proud of you, Sarah, the way you handled yourself today." "She'd be proud of both of us," Sarah affirms, echoing his earlier words. As they prepare to return to Cottonwood Ranch with their prisoner, Reed makes one final desperate attempt to wound his nemesis. "The ledger was a fake," he says suddenly. "Wasn't it? You planted false information." Malcolm smiles enigmatically. "Did I? I guess you'll never know for certain, will you?" Reed's face falls as the truth of his situation sinks in. Even if he someday escapes justice, he can never return to his powerful employers with uncertainty. Without absolute verification of the ledger's authenticity, he is useless to them, worse than useless, a liability. As they ride away from the crossroads, the morning sun illuminates the bodies of Reed's fallen companions, grim markers of the night's violence. Malcolm rides with his head high, his unseeing eyes somehow appearing to take in the beauty of the new day. "What now, Pa?" Sarah asks as they crest a hill overlooking Cottonwood Ranch. Malcolm considers this, feeling a weight lifting from his shoulders, a burden carried for 12 long years finally set down. "Now we rebuild, starting with the barn. And after that?" She presses. A genuine smile spreads across Malcolm's weathered face. "After that, we live, Sarah. Just live." Behind them, Reed rides in sullen silence, his dreams of glory and revenge shattered like his wrist. Before him lies only justice, long delayed but finally served. The legend of the ghost will continue, but the man, Malcolm Carter, blind rancher, devoted father, has finally found peace. As they approach Cottonwood Ranch, the morning sun bathes the house in golden light, promising new beginnings and the sweet possibility of ordinary days to come. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the crossroads, Cottonwood Ranch bustles with activity. The charred remains of the old barn have been cleared away, and the framework of a new structure rises in its place. Local farmers and ranchers, neighbors who had always respected the quiet blind rancher and his daughter, came together in the tradition of barn raising, their hammers creating a rhythmic symphony that echoes across the property. Malcolm stands at the edge of the construction, his unseeing eyes turned toward the sounds of community and renewal. His fingers trace a freshly cut beam, feeling the grain of the wood, assessing its strength and quality. "Pine," he murmurs appreciatively. "Good choice." Robert Jenkins approaches, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your neighbors insisted on the best materials. Seems you've earned their respect, Mr. Carter." Malcolm smiles, hearing the unspoken question. In Robert's voice, "Not through my past, if that's what you're wondering. Through being a good neighbor myself." Robert hesitates, then asks the question that has lingered in everyone's minds since the truth emerged. "Do they know about who you were?" Malcolm's weathered face reveals nothing. "Some suspect, I imagine. Rumors spread fast in small communities." He turns his face toward the sun, feeling its warmth. "But sometimes people prefer comfortable half-truths to uncomfortable realities." Sarah's voice calls from the direction of the house. "Pa! Robert! Lunch is ready!" The construction pauses as the workers gather under the shade of the great cottonwood tree, where tables have been arranged. Sarah and several neighboring women distribute sandwiches, cold lemonade, and apple pie. The atmosphere is relaxed, celebratory, even a community reaffirming itself after violence threatened its peace. Malcolm finds a seat beside Ethan, who has been overseeing the barn raising with military efficiency. "How's it looking?" Malcolm asks, accepting a plate from Sarah. "We'll have the frame completed by sundown," Ethan reports. "Roof tomorrow, weather permitting." He lowers his voice. "Any word from Harrisville?" Malcolm nods slightly. "Telegram arrived this morning. Federal marshals took Reed into custody yesterday. He's being transported to Denver for trial. Think he'll talk?" About the ledger and who hired him? Doubtful, Malcolm replies. Reed may be many things, but he's not a man who betrays his employers. A thoughtful expression crosses his face. Though I imagine those employers are keeping their distance now. A failed operative with questionable information is a liability they can't afford. Charlie Taylor joins them, excitement evident in his young voice. Mr. Carter, did you hear? Judge Franklin arrived from Denver last night. They're reopening the marshal's office in Harrisville. Malcolm nods. Good news indeed. Though I imagine the new marshal will have quite a task restoring order. Charlie glances around to ensure they won't be overheard, then leans closer. There's something else. The judge brought federal agents with him. They're investigating corruption throughout the territory. Word is, some prominent men are already fleeing. A ghost of a smile touches Malcolm's lips. Interesting timing. Ethan gives Malcolm a questioning look. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Malcolm's expression remains inscrutable. Me? I'm just a blind rancher. He takes a bite of his sandwich, effectively ending that line of conversation. After lunch, as the men return to their work, Sarah leads Malcolm away from the crowd. They walk toward her mother's grave, a peaceful spot on a gentle hill overlooking the ranch. Malcolm knows the path by heart, his boots finding the familiar trail without hesitation. You sent the real ledger to Denver, didn't you? Sarah asks, once they're alone. That day you gave me the key to the safety deposit box. Malcolm stops beside his wife's headstone, his fingers brushing the carved letters of her name. The ledger served its purpose, gathering dust in that bank vault. 12 years was long enough. But why now? Sarah presses. After all this time. Malcolm kneels, placing a wildflower on Eliza's grave. Your mother once told me that secrets are like seeds. Bury them and they don't disappear. They grow into something you can no longer control. He straightens slowly. It was time to uproot this particular seed before it poisoned another generation. Sarah studies her father's face, seeing the weight of his decision. You could have sent it anonymously. Instead you signed your name, the real one. The ghost of Laramie Basin, Malcolm acknowledges. Yes. Why take the risk after everything you've done to bury that identity? Malcolm turns toward her voice, his milky eyes somehow conveying profound wisdom despite their blindness. Because ending corruption means nothing if we hide in shadows ourselves. Your mother taught me that true redemption isn't found in anonymity, but in accountability. Sarah takes her father's weathered hand. What happens when people learn the truth? That Malcolm Carter and the ghost are one and the same? Some already know, he says simply. Judge Franklin was a young attorney when the ghost disappeared. He recognized the handwriting immediately. A wry smile crosses Malcolm's face. Apparently, he's been a secret admirer of my work for years, both the old and the new, and our neighbors, our friends. Malcolm's expression softens. People see what they choose to see, Sarah. To most, I'll always be the blind rancher who raised his daughter. Alone after his wife's passing, the man who helps when crops fail or winter comes early. He gestures toward the activity around the barn raising. This is who I am now. The past is just that. Past. As they walk back toward the house, Robert approaches with purpose in his stride. His usual reserve has given way to determination. He removes his hat as he addresses Malcolm. Mr. Carter, sir, with your permission, I'd like to speak with Sarah privately. Malcolm tilts his head, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Is that so? He turns toward his daughter, sensing her sudden nervousness. Sarah? She clears her throat. Yes. That would be fine. Malcolm nods, stepping away. I'll be on the porch if needed. As he walks toward the house, his acute hearing picks up Robert's first nervous words to Sarah, the beginning of a conversation long in coming. From the porch, Malcolm listens, to the sounds of the barn raising, creating a mental image of the progress. His fingers find the worn wood of his rocking chair, a comfortable friend that has witnessed countless sunsets. As he settles into it, Ethan joins him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you might need this," Ethan says, placing a mug in Malcolm's outstretched hand. "Looks like Robert finally found his courage." Malcolm sips the hot coffee appreciatively. "About time. Been watching him work up to it for months." Ethan chuckles. "Your daughter could do worse than a hard-working blacksmith." "Much worse," Malcolm agrees. His expression grows more serious. "She deserves happiness, Ethan, a normal life." "As do you," Ethan points out. "What will you do now, with the ghost's identity revealed to the authorities?" Malcolm considers this. I question, feeling the weight of possibilities. "Judge Franklin offered me amnesty in exchange for testimony against certain officials named in the ledger." Ethan's surprise is evident in his voice. "Will you accept?" Still deciding, Malcolm admits the ghost's testimony would carry significant weight, could help dismantle corruption that's poisoned these territories for decades. He sighs deeply. "But it would also mean revisiting a past I've tried to leave behind, and potentially endangering." "Sarah," Ethan adds, understanding the unspoken concern. Malcolm nods gravely. "There would be those who wouldn't appreciate such testimony, men with resources, influence." His hand unconsciously moves to his revolver, now rarely worn, but kept close. Men who might seek retribution. They sit in contemplative silence, watching. The community worked together to rebuild what violence had destroyed. In the distance, Sarah and Robert walk along the fence line, their conversation animated. Malcolm can't see them, but he senses his daughter's happiness in the cadence of her. Distant laughter. "She's stronger than you give her credit for," Ethan observes, following Malcolm's unseeing gaze, "much like her mother." A sad smile touches Malcolm's lips. Eliza would have known what to do. She always saw the path forward more clearly than I did. What would she advise now, do you think? Malcolm is quiet for a long moment, remembering. She'd say that running from the past doesn't erase it, that the only way forward is through truth, however difficult. His voice softens with memory. She believed in redemption, Ethan, not just for me, but for the world around us. Ethan sips his coffee thoughtfully. Then perhaps your testimony isn't just about the past. Perhaps it's about Sarah's future, about the kind of world she'll inherit. Malcolm's expression shifts as this perspective settles in his mind. You may be right. He turns his face toward the setting sun, feeling its fading warmth on his skin. Perhaps it's time for one last mission for the ghost. 3 months later, the newly completed barn stands proud against the Wyoming sky. Fresh red paint gleams in the autumn sunlight, a vibrant contrast to the weathered gray of the main house. Inside, the sweet smell of fresh hay mingles with the earthy scent of livestock, life continuing, thriving even after destruction tried to take root. Malcolm works methodically, brushing down his favorite gelding after a morning ride. Though blind, his movements are confident, practiced. Each stroke of the brush follows the contours of the horse's muscles, finding every spot that needs attention. The animal stands patiently, occasionally nickering with appreciation. The sound of an approaching buggy reaches Malcolm's sensitive ears long before it enters the yard. He recognizes the particular rhythm of the horse's gait, the distinctive creak of the vehicle's right wheel. Judge Franklin, he murmurs to himself, setting aside the brush and making his way toward the barn door. The buggy stops in the yard, and Judge William Franklin descends, a tall, distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes. He carries a leather portfolio and the air of someone bearing significant news. Malcolm, the judge calls in greeting. Hope I'm not intruding. Malcolm steps into the sunlight, extending his hand. Not at all, Your Honor. Sarah's in town with Robert, but I can offer coffee if you'd like. Franklin shakes Malcolm's hand warmly. Coffee would be welcome. It's been a long ride from Harrisville. Inside the house, Malcolm moves with practiced ease, preparing coffee as the judge settles at the kitchen table. The domesticity of the scene belies the gravity of their association. I take it this isn't a social call, Malcolm observes, placing a steaming mug before the judge. Franklin accepts the coffee gratefully. No, though I wish it were. He opens his portfolio, removing several documents. I've come with news. The federal grand jury has returned indictments against 14 territorial officials based on your testimony and the contents of the ledger. Malcolm nods, absorbing this information. Good. Justice is long overdue. Indeed, Franklin agrees. However, there have been complications. He hesitates, choosing his words carefully. 3 of the indicted men have fled, believed to be heading to Mexico. To be expected, Malcolm comments. Men of their resources rarely face consequences willingly. Franklin's voice grows more serious. There's more. Before disappearing, they placed a new bounty on the ghost of Laramie Basin. $100,000. Malcolm receives this news with unsettling calm. Dead or alive? Dead only, Franklin says grimly. They want to ensure your silence is permanent, again to be expected. Malcolm sips his coffee, his expression betraying nothing of his inner thoughts. I appreciate the warning, Judge, but I've lived with threats before. Franklin leans forward. This is different, Malcolm. The size of the bounty will attract professionals, men who won't be easily deterred. He pushes a document across the table. That's why I've brought this. Official pardon and a new identity. Passage to California if you want it. Malcolm's fingers trace the embossed seal on the document, feeling the weight of the offer. Running again, he muses, trading one false name for another. It would mean safety, Franklin urges. For you and Sarah both. Malcolm stands, moving to the window where late autumn sunlight streams into the kitchen. Though he can't see the view, he feels the warmth on his face. Hears the familiar sounds of home, the windmill creaking in the breeze, chickens scratching in the yard, a distant cow lowing in the field. When I was the ghost, he says quietly, I moved like smoke from place to place. No roots, no connections, no real life. His hand touches the window frame, feeling the solid wood beneath his fingers. Then Eliza found me, broken and dying. She didn't just save my life, she gave me a home. He turns back toward Franklin. I won't run again, Judge. Not from men like these. Franklin sighs heavily. I feared you'd say that. You realize they won't stop? Let them come, Malcolm says with quiet certainty. This land has taught me patience. I can wait. And Sarah? What of her future? A smile touches Malcolm's weathered face. Sarah makes her own choices now. Robert proposed last week. They'll marry in the spring. Franklin's concern doesn't diminish. A wedding makes a fine target, Malcolm. It also makes a fine trap, Your Honor, Malcolm counters, a hint of the ghost's strategic mind revealing itself. These men want the ghost. Perhaps it's time they found him. One last time. Understanding dawns in Franklin's eyes. You're planning to draw them out. Malcolm returns to the table, his unseeing eyes somehow finding Franklin's with unnerving accuracy. I testified because it was right, not because it was safe. I won't cower now in the face of consequences. Franklin studies the blind rancher with new appreciation. You're a remarkable man, Malcolm Carter, or whatever name you choose to claim. I'm just a man trying to live with honor, Malcolm replies, simply. Something my wife taught me. He extends his hand across the table. Thank you for the warning, Judge, and for your concern. As Franklin prepares to leave, he pauses at the door. If you won't accept a new identity, at least accept this. He places a folded paper in Malcolm's hand. Federal Marshal's Commission, temporary jurisdiction, limited to Clearwater County. A wry smile crosses his face. Thought it might be fitting. The ghost, enforcing the law he once defied. Malcolm. unfolds the paper, his sensitive fingers tracing the embossed seal. Does seem fitting, he acknowledges with a hint of irony, though a blind marshal might raise eyebrows. No more than a blind gunslinger, Franklin counters. Besides, it gives you legal authority to defend yourself and others should these bounty hunters arrive. Malcolm considers the commission thoughtfully. I'll think about it. Winter descends on Cottonwood Ranch, transforming the landscape with a blanket of pristine snow. Malcolm sits before the fireplace, his fingers moving deftly across a block of pine wood as he carves. Nearby, Sarah reads aloud from her mother's journal, her voice painting pictures more vivid than any eyes could see. Today, Malcolm finally agreed to let me teach him to navigate without sight. Sarah reads, he resists out of pride, but I've convinced him it's for our daughter's future. Someday he may need to protect her when I cannot. He doesn't believe me, but I've seen how men like Reed operate. They never forget, and they never forgive. When they finally come, and they will come, Malcolm must be ready. Sarah pauses, looking up at her father. She knew, didn't she? Even then, Malcolm nods, his hands continuing their careful work on the carving. Your mother saw things others missed, including my own blindness, long before it claimed my eyes. Sarah closes the journal gently. The wedding invitations went out today. Robert's family, our neighbors. She hesitates. Do you think they'll come? The men hunting you? Perhaps, Malcolm acknowledges, but we'll be ready. He holds up the carving for her inspection. What do you think? Sarah takes the wooden figure, a delicately rendered horse, each detail perfect despite being carved by blind hands. It's beautiful, Pa. A wedding gift? For your firstborn, Malcolm corrects with a smile. Following tradition, the sound of approaching horses interrupts their moment. Malcolm tilts his head, listening intently. 2 riders, he says, rising from his chair. Strangers? Sarah moves to the window, peering through frost-etched glass. I don't recognize them. Both armed. Malcolm retrieves his revolvers from their place by the hearth, checking them with practiced hands. Stay inside, I'll greet our visitors. Stepping onto the snow-covered porch, Malcolm presents the image of a simple, blind rancher, until one notices the silver-inlaid revolvers hanging at his sides. The approaching riders slow, assessing the solitary figure awaiting them. Afternoon, gentlemen, Malcolm calls out. You're a long way from anywhere in this weather. The riders exchange glances before the leader responds. Looking for a man named Carter. Malcolm Carter. You've found him, Malcolm acknowledges. The question is, why were you looking? The men dismount cautiously, hands hovering near their weapons. Heard you might need help with your spring roundup, the leader says, the lie transparent in his voice. We're looking for work. Malcolm's weathered face reveals nothing. No hiring until spring, I'm afraid, and I know every ranch hand in 3 counties. His head tilts slightly. Strange time of year for drifters, unless you're hunting something other than work. The tension stretches between them, brittle as ice. The leader's hand inches closer to his holstered pistol. Why don't we stop pretending? Malcolm suggests calmly. You're here for the bounty. The revelation startles the men. The leader recovers quickly. If you know that, you know how this ends. Malcolm's unseeing eyes stare directly at the bounty. Hunter, do I? With blinding speed, Malcolm draws and fires both revolvers. The bullets strike with surgical precision, one knocking the leader's gun from his hand, the other doing the same to his companion. Both men stare in disbelief at their empty hands, then at the blind man who impossibly disarmed them without. Shedding blood. Gentlemen, Malcolm says into the stunned silence, I could have aimed 2 inches to the left and collected the bounty on your miserable lives. Remember that. He holsters one revolver, keeping the other trained on them. Now, I'm going to make you an offer. Ride back to whoever sent you. Tell them the ghost sends his regards and a warning. The next bounty hunters won't leave Cottonwood Ranch alive. The men back toward their horses, faces pale with the realization of how close they came to death. As they mount and prepare to flee, Malcolm calls after them. One more thing. My daughter's getting married this spring. Consider yourselves uninvited. As the bounty hunters gallop away, Sarah joins her father on the porch. There'll be more, she says softly. Malcolm nods, returning his revolver to its holster. Yes, but they'll be more cautious now. Word will spread. About the blind rancher, who shoots like he can see. There's a hint of pride in her voice, about the ghost who chose a different path. Malcolm corrects. He turns his face toward the horizon, feeling the winter sun on his skin. Your mother once told me that true strength isn't found in violence, but in the courage to build rather than destroy. His hand finds Sarah's shoulder. She was right as always. Together they stand on the threshold of their home, facing whatever future might come. A blind gunslinger redeemed by love, and the daughter who carries his legacy forward. Not a legacy of violence and fear, but of principle and courage. As snowflakes begin to fall around them, Malcolm tilts his face skyward, his unseeing eyes somehow finding beauty in a world he experiences through heart rather than sight. The ghost of Laramie Basin has finally found peace, not in darkness, but in the light of a life well lived. Come inside, Pa, Sarah says, taking his arm. There's coffee waiting, and Robert's coming for dinner. We have a wedding to plan. Malcolm smiles, allowing himself to be led back into the warmth of home. Lead the way, Sarah, you always do. The door closes behind them, shutting out the cold and the dangers that may still come. But within those walls, something stronger than fear takes root. The simple, enduring power of a family forged in adversity and tempered by love. The legend of the ghost continues, but the man, Malcolm Carter, blind rancher, devoted father and reluctant hero, has finally found his true aim.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.